Let the heavy curtain of the present fall away. Let the white noise of the modern world, the hum of electricity, the distant drone of traffic, the relentless notification of the digital clock, dissolve into a profound, organic silence. We are drifting backward, slipping through the strata of time, descending past the Iron Age, past the Neolithic, past the Ice Ages, deeper and deeper into the cradle of the epochs. We arrive in the Miocene, a time roughly 20 million years ago, a golden afternoon in the history of the Earth where the planet breathed in a rhythm of heat and humidity that we can scarcely imagine today. Here, the world is not merely green, it is a cathedral of chlorophyll, a vast, breathing structure of leaves that spans continents. This is the Green Cathedral. The canopy is so thick, so woven with the complex tapestries of vines and branches that it swallows the sun. The light that reaches the forest floor is not the harsh, direct beam of the solar disk, but a diffused, aqueous glow, green and golden, filtering through layer upon layer of foliage, like light passing through the stained glass of an ancient sanctuary. In this verdant twilight, the air is heavy with the scent of fermentation, of fallen fruit returning to the soil, of damp moss, and the resinous perfume of ancient bark. It is a humid, silent world. Yet if you listen closely, the silence is textured. It is filled with the chitter of insects, the rustle of wind through palm fronds, and the distant, haunting calls of primates echoing through the high branches. In this suspended reality, our distant ancestors moved with a purposeful, silent intent. They were not yet the walkers of the vast open plains. They had not yet stepped out onto the golden savannas to stand fully upright under the naked sky. They were dwellers of the branch, navigators of the three-dimensional maze of the canopy. To live here was to be an acrobat of survival. But more than that, life in this epoch was a rugged physical negotiation with the earth itself. There were no supermarkets, no processed grains, no fires to soften the fibers of the world. Survival was not given. It was not passive. It was chewed, ground, and extracted by force from the stubborn, resistant fibers of the primeval forest. Picture, if you will, the face of this ancient being. It appears out of the shadows of the teak and mahogany trees, a face at once familiar and deeply alien. It does not possess the flat, vertical profile of the modern human. It is not tucked neatly beneath a high, rounded forehead. Instead, the face projects forward, a magnificent, protruding muzzle that speaks of function over vanity. This is a face designed by the rigorous architecture of necessity. The jaw is not the delicate, curved horseshoe of bone we trace on our own faces today, liable to break under impact or crowd its own teeth. It is a protruding, magnificent engine of force. It is a biological vice, a hydraulic press made of calcium and muscle. Consider the mandible, the lower jaw. In this era, it is thick, dense, and heavy, fortified with extra layers of cortical bone to withstand immense tension. It is built like the foundation of a fortress. Anchoring this jaw to the skull are muscles of staggering power. The temporalis muscle, which you can feel on your own temples when you clench your teeth, was, in our ancestor, a titanic fan of flesh that reached all the way to the top of the skull. In some lineages, these muscles were so massive that the skull developed a ridge of bone along the top, a sagittal crest, just to provide an anchor point strong enough to hold them. This was not a flaw. It was the engine room of survival. This apparatus housed a set of teeth designed for a world without softness. We often forget, in our age of puddings and breads and tenderized meats, that for the vast majority of biological history, the world was hard. It was encased in shells, wrapped in fibrous husks, and buried in gritty soil. The diet of the Miocene hominoid was a menu of resistance. It consisted of tough roots that had to be ripped from the earth, covered in quartz grit that acted like sandpaper on enamel. It included fibrous stalks of bamboo and sedge that required hours of rhythmic grinding to break down. It featured raw nuts encased in shells as hard as stone, which had to be cracked not with a hammerstone, but with the sheer crushing pressure of the molars. Imagine the sensory experience of a meal in this deep past. Our ancestor sits on a broad bough of a fig tree, safe from the predators that prowl the forest floor. They hold a tuber, dug fresh from the riverbank. It is caked in dirt, tough as leather. There is no knife to slice it, no water to boil it soft. There is only the mouth. They place the tuber between their back teeth, the molars, and bite down. The jaw muscles contract. The force generated is immense, hundreds of pounds of pressure focused on a few square centimeters of tooth surface. The jaw moves in a rhythmic rotary motion, a grinding cycle that goes on for hours. To eat is to work. It is an athletic endeavor. The sound is the crunch of cellulose, the snap of fibers, the grinding of silica against enamel. This relentless friction, this daily war between tooth and food, define the biology of the mouth. Teeth, despite being the hardest substance the body can produce, harder than steel, tougher than gold, are not invincible. They are finite resources. Under the constant abrasion of the Miocene diet, the teeth began to wear down from the moment they erupted. The high peaks of the molars were ground flat. The sharp edges of the incisors were chipped and dulled. By the time an ancestor reached the age of 20 or 25, their teeth were often worn down to smooth, polished nubs, their efficiency significantly reduced. In a world where processing food was the only way to extract energy, a worn-out mouth was a slow death sentence. And here lies the profound beauty of the design, the secret locked in the darkness of the gums. Deep in the back of the mouth, waiting in the crypts of the jawbone, lay the third molars. We call them wisdom teeth today, a poetic moniker for a source of modern misery. But in the Green Cathedral, they were not intruders. They were not afterthoughts or mistakes. They were essential laborers, waiting for their shift to begin. They were the reinforcements, the cavalry arriving just as the front lines were beginning to falter. Evolution is a master of timing. The third molars were programmed to erupt late, typically in early adulthood, around the age when the first and second molars had already endured a decade or more of punishment. As the ancient jaw grew and lengthened, stimulated by the intense exercise of chewing, it created ample space at the rear of the arch. There was no crowding, no impaction. The jaw was a wide, welcoming cavern, spacious enough to house every soldier in the dental army. When the third molar finally pierced the gum, emerging into the humid air of the mouth, it was a moment of biological salvation. It presented a fresh, pristine surface of enamel, sharp ridges and deep valleys ready to tackle the toughest nuts and the most fibrous roots. It was a spare tire provided by nature, a new grinding stone for the mill that never stopped. It allowed the elder, and at 30 years old, one was indeed an elder, to continue to partake in the feast of the forest. It meant they could process enough calories to nurse a child, to lead a troop, to survive another winter. The wisdom tooth was a survival mechanism, a silent witness to the brutality of our diet. Let us linger for a moment on the specific mechanics of this wisdom. The position of this tooth is not random. In the engineering of the jaw, the mouth functions as a Class 3 lever. The joint of the jaw, the temporomandibular joint, is the fulcrum. The muscles provide the effort. The food is the load. By placing a tooth at the very back of the jaw, closer to the hinge, nature provided a mechanical advantage. Just as it is easier to crack a walnut if you place it close to the hinge of a nutcracker, the third molar was positioned to deliver the maximum amount of crushing force with the least amount of muscular effort. It was the heavy artillery of the mouth, designed for the hardest tasks the environment could offer. Life in the Green Cathedral was rhythmic, governed by the rising and setting of the sun and the cyclical demands of the belly. Morning began with the search. The eyes, set forward for depth perception, scanned the complex, chaotic greenery for the shape of a fruit or the texture of an edible leaf. The hands, grasping and strong, pulled the body through the canopy. But it was the mouth that connected the being to the energy of the sun trapped in the plant. Consider the silence of the night in this epoch. The sun dips below the horizon, and the Green Cathedral turns into a realm of shadows and acoustic terror. Our ancestors clustered together in the high branches, huddling for warmth and safety. Below them, the saber-toothed cats and the hyenodonts prowl, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. In this darkness, the body is at rest, but the biology is hard at work. The jawbone, stressed by the day's chewing, is rebuilding itself. Osteoblasts, the tiny architects of bone, are laying down new mineral matrix, thickening the mandible, reinforcing the attachment points of the muscles. The body is responding to the demands placed upon it. You need force, the DNA whispers. I will give you stone. The wisdom teeth, still hidden beneath the gum line in the younger members of the troop, are forming. Layer by microscopic layer, calcium and phosphate are crystallizing into the crown of the tooth. They are growing in anticipation of a life that will be hard. They are growing with the expectation that the jaw will be massive, that the food will be tough, and that they will be needed. There is no foresight in evolution, only the memory of what has worked before. And for millions of years, what worked was a large jaw, a heavy brow, and a full complement of 32 teeth, each one a vital tool in the kit of survival. This biological harmony, the perfect fit between the environment, the diet, and the anatomy, lasted for eons. Time in the Miocene does not rush, it pools. Generation after generation lived and died in the embrace of the forest. They were born into the green twilight. They learned the map of the trees. They chewed the tough fibers of their world, and they passed their genes forward. The wisdom of the body was absolute. There was no mismatch. The jaw was exactly as big as it needed to be. The teeth were exactly as tough as the food required. It was a closed loop of efficiency. But the earth is not a static stage. It is a slow, shifting platform. As we drift through this deep time narrative, we can sense a change on the horizon. The climate is beginning to cool. The moisture locked in the atmosphere is being drawn into the growing ice caps at the poles. The great global rainforests, which once stretched from Africa to Europe, are beginning to fragment. The Green Cathedral is thinning. The canopy is breaking apart, letting in shafts of blinding dry sunlight. The spaces between the trees are widening, filled with grasses that dance in the wind. The savannah is coming. And with the changing of the world, the demands on the body will change. But the genetic code is a slow writer. It does not erase its previous chapters quickly. As our ancestors stand on the precipice of this new world, looking out over the expanding grasslands, They still carry the heavy equipment of the forest dweller. They still carry the massive jaw, the heavy brow, and the dormant seeds of the wisdom teeth, waiting for a future that is about to vanish. But for now, in the safety of the deep past, let us hold the image of the perfect design. See the ancestor resting after a meal, the powerful jaw relaxed, the breathing slow and steady. They are a master of their domain, equipped with a biological toolkit honed by millions of years of selection. The wisdom tooth sleeps in the bone, a promise of future strength. The forest breathes around them, a vast green lung exhaling oxygen into the ancient air. There is no pain of impaction, no overcrowding, no need for the surgeon's steel. There is only the grandeur of the body doing exactly what it evolved to do: survive, persist, and endure in a world of beautiful, brutal resistance. This was the inheritance we were given, a mouth built for a world of iron and wood, a legacy carved in bone, intended to last a lifetime. It is a legacy we still carry today, buried in our own jaws, a silent, crowded memory of the time when we were kings and queens of the canopy, and our bite was the mightiest tool we possessed. The sun sets on the Miocene, casting long shadows through the trees, and the stars begin to emerge, the same stars we see, but watched by eyes set in a face of raw, unadulterated power. The night falls, and the grinding stones of the mouth are finally at rest, waiting for the dawn of another day in the deep green struggle of life. The mist of the Miocene forest clears, and we are left standing in the silence of the museum of the mind. Before us, resting on a pedestal of imaginary velvet, lies a skull. It is not the white, smooth, globular cranium of a modern human, the fragile eggshell that houses our anxieties and our algorithms. No, this object is heavy, stained the color of tea and iron by the minerals of the earth that held it for 2 million years. It feels dense to the touch, like a river stone. It is a fortress of calcium, a biological bunker built to withstand a siege that lasted a lifetime. To understand the tooth, that small, enamel-coated sovereign of the mouth, one must first understand this scaffold that held it. One must understand the architecture of force. Drift your hand in your mind's eye over the contours of this ancient bone. The first thing you notice is the ridge. Running along the very top of the skull, from front to back, is a crest of bone, sharp and pronounced, like the keel of a capsized ship or the stone mohawk of a gargoyle. This is the sagittal crest. In our modern bodies, the top of the head is smooth, a rounded dome where the skin lies flat against the bone. But in this ancient time, the skull was not merely a container for the brain, it was an anchor. Why does a creature need a ridge of bone on top of its head? The answer lies in the jaw. Place your fingers on your own temples and grit your teeth. You feel a flutter of muscle, a subtle tightening. That is your temporalis muscle, a pale shadow of what it once was. Now, imagine that muscle growing, thickening, expanding until it is not a small patch on the side of your head, but a massive fan of red fiber sweeping up from the lower jaw, covering the entire side of the skull and meeting its twin from the other side at the very top of the head. These muscles were so colossal, so hungry for space, that the skull had to grow that bony ridge just to give them a place to attach. They were the cables of a suspension bridge, and the sagittal crest was the tower holding them taut. This was the anatomy of the grinder. This was the biology of the crusher. Every time this ancestor bit down, it was not a casual motion. It was a hydraulic event. The force generated was sufficient to shatter bamboo, to pulverized roots protected by grit, to shear through the raw, sun-dried hide of a carcass scavenged on the plains. The skull was built this way because the world demanded it. The environment was not a place of purees and soups, it was a place of resistance. And to survive, one had to break that resistance, bite by bite. Let us descend from the crest to the face itself. Look at the profile. It is a landscape of projection. The modern face is flat, a vertical cliff that drops from the forehead to the chin, tucked neatly under the brain. But the face of our ancestor jutted forward, protruding like the prow of a great ocean liner cutting through the waves of time. This is known as prognathism. It gave the face a snout-like appearance, a heavy, forward-driven distinctiveness. This projection was not an aesthetic choice, it was a matter of leverage. In the physics of the skull, the jaw is a lever and the food is the load. By projecting the face forward, evolution created a longer, more powerful system for the distribution of stress. It allowed for a wider gape, a mouth that could open to encompass the husks and shells of the Paleolithic menu. But more importantly, it created room. This is the crucial detail, the secret lost to time. Within this expansive, forward-jutting arch of bone, there was space, immense, luxurious space. Imagine the dental arch, the horseshoe curve of the teeth, as a piece of real estate. In the modern mouth, this land is scarce. It is a cramped city center where buildings crowd against each other, twisting and turning to find a foothold. But in the architecture of the ancient jaw, the dental arch was a sprawling frontier. It was wide, U-shaped, and generous. The bone of the mandible was thick and robust, a solid beam of calcium that could absorb the shock of thousands of pounds of pressure over a lifetime. Because of this ample space, the teeth stood in a perfect, uncrowded line. They were soldier straight, standing shoulder to shoulder, with no need to jostle for position. There was no twisting, no overlapping, no chaotic collision of enamel. The incisors at the front were broad shovels for gripping. The canines were sturdy pillars. The premolars were the first stage of the mill. And then, stretching back into the dark cavern of the mouth, were the molars. The first molar, the second molar. And there, at the very end of the line, sitting comfortably in its designated place, was the third molar, the wisdom tooth. In this era of brute strength, the wisdom tooth was not a medical condition. It was a king taking his throne. Because the jaw was so long, because the face projected so far forward, there was a designated seat waiting for it. When it began to rise, sometime in the late adolescence of the creature, it did not slam into the back of the second molar. It did not get trapped under a shelf of bone. It rose vertically, majestically, sliding into place as naturally as a key gliding into a well-oiled lock. There was no pain of impaction. There was no infection caused by a gum flap unable to retract. There was only the sensation of completion. The dental line was finally whole. The machine was fully assembled. Let us step into the skin of this ancestor for a moment to feel the reality of this architecture. Let us go to a day in the dry season, 2 million years ago, in the rift valleys of East Africa. The rains have failed. The lush fruits are gone. The soft leaves have shriveled into dust. The world has turned yellow and brown, harsh and unforgiving. Our ancestor, a robust hominid, perhaps a member of the Paranthropus clan or an early Homo, sits in the shade of an acacia tree. Hunger is a constant, dull ache in the belly. On the ground before them lies a pile of tubers dug from the hard-baked earth and a scattering of nuts with shells as thick as wood. This is famine food. It is food that fights back. The ancestor picks up a nut. It is coated in dirt. They place it deep in the mouth, rolling it back onto the platform of the second and third molars. This is the sweet spot, close to the hinge of the jaw, where the leverage is greatest. Now, the engine engages. The massive temporalis muscles on the side of the head contract. The sagittal crest bears the tension. The masseter muscles on the cheeks bulge, hard as rocks. The jaw closes. The pressure builds. 50 pounds, 100 pounds, 200 pounds of force. In a modern human, this kind of pressure might crack a tooth or dislocate the jaw. But here, the architecture holds. The thick cortical bone of the mandible does not bend. The roots of the molars, deep and widely splayed like the roots of an oak tree, distribute the shock wave into the skull, where it is dampened by the sponge-like trabecular bone. Crack. The sound is loud, a sharp report like a breaking branch that startles a nearby bird. The shell shatters. The rich, oily kernel inside is released. The tongue sweeps the fragments, separating the meat from the shard, and the grinding begins. This chewing is rhythmic, hypnotic. It is the background noise of the species. Side to side, grind and crush. The wisdom teeth, those late arrivals, are now in the thick of the action. They are the broad, flat millstones at the back of the factory, pulverizing the toughest fibers, turning the impossible into the edible. Without them, the surface area for grinding would be reduced. The food would not be processed enough to release its nutrients. The ancestor would starve, the stomach unable to unlock the chemical energy hidden in the fiber. In this light, the wisdom tooth is not a vestige. It is a survival weapon. It is a gift bestowed by the genetic code to ensure that the individual can survive the hardest seasons of their life. By the time these teeth emerged, the front teeth might have been worn down to nubs by years of grit. The arrival of the third molars was a second wind for the digestive system, a fresh set of tools introduced just when the original set was beginning to fail. The harmony of this system is breathtaking. We often think of evolution as a clumsy process of trial and error. But when we look at the skull of our ancestors, we see a kind of functional perfection. Form followed function with absolute, ruthless precision. The genes that dictated the size of the teeth were in perfect conversation with the genes that dictated the size of the jaw. The blueprint was coherent. "Build a big mill," the DNA whispered, "and I will build a big room to house it." There was no mismatch. The silent error that haunts modern humanity, the discrepancy between the size of our teeth and the size of our mouths, had not yet occurred. The silence of the genome was peaceful. The body was a promise kept. Imagine the nights in this era. The troop sleeps huddled together against the chill of the Pleistocene night. The fire is not yet a constant companion, or perhaps it is just a flickering novelty, not yet the central hearth of life. The breathing of the group is audible, a collective rhythm. If you were to look into the open mouth of a sleeping elder, illuminated by the starlight, you would see a marvel of engineering. 32 teeth, a broad, generous arch, no crowding, no decay from refined sugars. Just a set of tools worn smooth by honest use, sitting in a jaw of granite-like density. This bone was not just structure, it was a memory storage device. Every meal, every struggle, every season of plenty and season of want was recorded in the density of the mandible. The bone remodeled itself constantly, responding to the stress of chewing by laying down more calcium, becoming denser, stronger. The jaw was a biography of the creature's resilience. But deep within this perfection, the seeds of change were waiting. The world is never still. The climate cycles of the Earth were turning, bringing new challenges, new environments. And somewhere in the haze of the future, a new behavior was forming. A behavior that would change everything. A stone striking another stone. A spark falling into dry grass. The smell of cooking meat. These things were coming, and when they arrived, they would change the equation of survival. They would make the massive jaw, the sagittal crest, and the heavy muscles expensive luxuries. They would offer a shortcut to digestion that bypassed the mouth entirely. But in this moment, in the architecture of force, we are still in the age of the physical. We are still in the time when the body had to be its own hammer, its own knife, its own fire. Feel the weight of that legacy in your own jaw. Run your tongue along the back of your teeth. You might feel a gap, or a scar, or the crowded pressure of a tooth that has no room to speak. That discomfort is a ghost. It is a haunting from this time of perfection. It is your body remembering a time when it was a fortress, when it was wide enough to hold the sky, when it was built to crush the world into sustenance. The heavy-browed ancestor looks out from the veil of time, their face projecting forward, their jaw set in a line of determination. They do not know that their descendants will walk on the moon or split the atom or weave the digital web. They only know the hunger of the dry season and the comforting solid strength of the bone that allows them to endure it. They bite down, and the sound echoes across the millennia. The sound of a perfect machine working exactly as it was designed to do. As we drift away from this image, watching the heavy skull fade back into the sands of the Rift Valley, we carry with us a sense of loss. We have gained so much: language, culture, the soft comforts of the modern world, but we have lost the architecture of force. We have traded the fortress for the temple of the mind. And the wisdom teeth, those loyal soldiers of the rear guard, are the refugees of that trade, wandering in a landscape that no longer has a home for them. The silence of the prehistoric night returns. The wind whistles through the acacia thorns. The heavy chewing stops, and the ancestor sleeps, their massive jaw relaxed, the sagittal crest rising like a mountain range in the moonlight, guarding the dreams of a species that is about to wake up and change the world forever. The transition from the era of brute force to the era of grace was not a single event, but a slow, fading sunset of the old ways. As the epochs ground on, the very earth beneath the feet of our ancestors began to shift. The tectonic plates of Africa pulled apart, creating new microclimates, new challenges. And with each generation, the specific pressures on the skull were subtly altered. Consider the role of the neck in this architecture. To support a head that is front-heavy, weighed down by a massive mandible and the muscles to power it, the neck muscles had to be thick and powerful. The connection point where the spine met the skull, the foramen magnum, was positioned to balance this load. The entire upper body was recruited in the act of stabilization during the violent act of chewing. When we speak of the architecture of force, we are speaking of a total biological commitment. The body did not dabble in strength, it invested in it. The caloric cost of maintaining such massive jaw muscles was high. The protein required to build and repair the dense bone of the skull was significant. In a world of scarcity, the body would not spend these resources unless the return on investment was guaranteed. And for millions of years it was. The return was life itself. But what happens when the investment begins to yield diminishing returns? What happens when the nut can be cracked with a stone instead of a tooth? What happens when the meat can be softened with flame instead of force? The blueprint begins to drift. The tight constraints of natural selection loosen. The perfect machine begins to dismantle itself, piece by piece. But that is a story for the fireside of the future. For now, in the deep time of this chapter, we remain in the zenith of the jaw. We remain in the time of the giants of the gape. Visualize the texture of the gums in this ancient mouth. Tough, keratinized, able to withstand the slip of a sharp bamboo stalk or the shard of a bone. The sensory feedback from the teeth was acute. The periodontal ligament, the microscopic hammock that holds the tooth in the socket, is rich with nerve endings. It tells the brain exactly how hard to bite, when to stop, when the shell has given way. This feedback loop was the software running the hardware. It was a sensory experience of the world that we have largely lost. We experience our food as flavor, as temperature. They experienced it as texture, as resistance, as a physical opponent to be vanished. The wisdom tooth, sitting in its throne at the back, was the ultimate sensor. Positioned where the forces were highest, it reported back to the brain the limits of the skull's endurance. It was the guardian of the hinge. There is a melancholy beauty in this obsolescence. To look at a wisdom tooth on a dental X-ray today, tilted and trapped, is to look at a fallen king. But here, in the text of the past, let us restore it to its glory. Let us polish the crown, straighten the root, and place it back in the wide, welcoming arch of the ancestor. Let it stand tall. Let it shine in the darkness of the mouth. Let it be what it was meant to be, a symbol of a time when we were strong enough to eat the world raw. The sun rises over the savannah. The golden light hits the heavy brow ridge, casting a shadow over the eyes. The mouth opens in a yawn, displaying the magnificent, unbroken arcade of ivory. The architecture of force is awake, and it is ready to survive another day in the garden of stone and thorn. And so the scaffold holds, the muscles tense. The legacy is secured for now in the calcium vaults of the past. Time flows like a slow, relentless river, carrying us away from the verdant embrace of the Miocene forests and depositing us onto the vast golden stage of the open savanna. The canopy has shattered. The protective ceiling of leaves, which once filtered the sun and hid the stars, has receded, leaving our ancestors exposed under an endless, indifferent sky. We have arrived in the Pleistocene, a world of oscillation, where the ice sheets pulse from the north and the deserts breathe from the south. It is a world of extremes, a landscape of high risks and high rewards, where the wind scours the plains and the horizon stretches to the very edge of imagination. Here, in the gathering twilight of a day 2 million years ago, the darkness is not merely an absence of light. It is a physical weight. When the sun dips below the jagged silhouette of the Rift Valley, the world does not simply go to sleep. It transforms. The dominance of the primate ends, and the reign of the predator begins. The air fills with the coughing roars of saber-toothed cats, the whooping calls of hyenas, and the stealthy rustle of the leopards in the acacia branches. For a creature without claws, without fangs, and without the crushing jaw of a carnivore, the night is a kingdom of terror. Our ancestors, the early Homo erectus, are huddled together, small islands of shivering flesh in a sea of obsidian danger. They are vulnerable. Their only defense is their vigilance and the stones held in their trembling hands. But then, a new light flickers in the darkness. It begins, perhaps, with a violent storm. A jagged bolt of lightning, a spear of pure energy from the heavens, strikes a dead baobab tree. The wood, dried by the relentless African sun, explodes. A plume of smoke rises, twisting like a gray snake into the sky. And then the color appears, orange, red, gold. A living, dancing spirit that eats the wood and breathes the wind. The animals of the plain flee in panic. The antelopes scatter, the lions retreat. Fire is the one beast that even the kings of the savannah fear. But one of our ancestors does not run. Imagine him, standing at the edge of the smoldering grove, his brow heavy, his eyes reflecting the chaotic dance of the flames. He feels the heat on his skin, a strange comfort against the chill of the coming night. He sees the power of it, and in a moment of supreme courage, a moment that will rewrite the destiny of the entire planet, he reaches out. He does not touch the flame directly, for he knows its bite. He picks up a branch, the end of it glowing like a captured star. He holds it aloft. He has tamed the red flower. He brings it back to the circle. He feeds it dry grass, then twigs, then thick logs. The fire grows. It pushes back the shadows. It creates a sphere of light and warmth, a sanctuary carved out of the night. The eyes of the predators, once so close, now reflect the firelight from a safe distance, kept at bay by this new terrestrial sun. This is the first hearth. This is the first home. And as the tribe gathers around this miraculous warmth, staring into the mesmerizing heart of the flame, they are unaware that they have just ignited a biological revolution that will alter the shape of their faces forever. For the fire was not merely a weapon against the dark. It was a tool of transformation. It was a chemical laboratory. The transition was likely accidental at first. A haunch of gazelle dropped into the embers, a tuber forgotten in the hot ashes. But the nose knows. The scent that drifted up from the fire was unlike anything that had ever drifted across the plains before. It was rich, savory, complex. It triggered a primal hunger deep in the belly. When the ancestor retrieved the food, brushing off the gray ash and took a bite, the experience was a revelation. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we must remember the architecture of force from the previous era. Raw meat is a rubbery, resistant puzzle. It requires immense effort to shear. The muscle fibers are wrapped in tough sheaths of collagen, a protein as strong as a steel cable. To eat raw game is to gnaw, to tear, and to struggle. It is a battle between the tooth and the tissue. Similarly, the wild tubers of the savannah are bitter, hard, and starchy. The energy within them is locked away inside microscopic granules, protected by cellular walls of cellulose that the human stomach struggles to break down. But fire is a predigestive magic. It is an alchemist. When the meat hit the heat, the physics of the food changed. The collagen began to denature. The tight triple helix structures of the proteins unwound, turning into soft, soluble gelatin. The meat became tender. It fell apart in the mouth. The intense heat of the fire performed the work of chewing before the food even touched the lips. It was as if the fire were a set of external teeth, invisible and tireless, pre-chewing the world for us. The same magic happened to the plants. The heat caused the starch granules in the tubers to swell and burst, a process we call gelatinization. The rigid cellular walls broke down. The toxic compounds were neutralized. The bitter, rock-hard root became a sweet, soft, energy-dense mash. Suddenly, the act of eating no longer required the brute force of a hydraulic press. The hours spent chewing, which for our primate cousins could consume nearly half the waking day, began to diminish. The heavy lifting was done by the thermal energy of the hearth, not the kinetic energy of the jaw. This was the spark in the dark that illuminated the path to modern humanity, but it cast a long shadow over the anatomy of the mouth. In the flickering light of the campfire, a subtle signal was sent to the body's blueprint. The era of the heavy grind is ending. Imagine a day in the life of this fire-wielding ancestor. The sun rises over Lake Turkana, painting the water in shades of turquoise and jade. The air is filled with the calls of waterfowl. The group wakes, not cold and stiff, but warm from the embers that were carefully tended through the night. They move out onto the plains, walking with the long, striding gait of the traveler. They are hunters and scavengers, reading the story of the land in the tracks in the dust and the circling of vultures in the sky. They find a carcass, or perhaps they run down a wildebeest in the heat of the day, using their sweating skin, another new adaptation, to outlast the panting prey. In the old days, they would have had to consume the meat immediately, gorging themselves before the hyenas arrived, tearing at the raw flesh with frantic urgency. But now they can carry it. They carry it back to the central place, back to the smoke that marks their sanctuary. The preparation of the meal becomes a ritual. The smell of roasting meat binds the group together, and when they eat, it is a communal act of pleasure. They sit, shoulder to shoulder, stripping the tender meat from the bone. There is laughter. There is the beginning of language, born in the leisure time created by cooking. Because they do not have to spend 5 hours chewing, they have time to talk, to plan, to bond, to stare at the stars and wonder. But while the mind was expanding, the jaw was receiving a notice of redundancy. Bone is a living tissue. It is not dead stone. It is a dynamic, responsive material that obeys a rule known to science as Wolff's Law. This law states that bone in a healthy person or animal will adapt to the loads under which it is placed. If loading on a particular bone increases, the bone will remodel itself over time to become stronger to resist that sort of loading. Conversely, if the loading on a bone decreases, the bone will become less dense and weaker due to the lack of stimulus. For millions of years, the massive temporalis and masseter muscles had been screaming at the jawbone, build, reinforce, thicken. The violence of chewing raw roots and tough hides sent shock waves through the mandible that stimulated the osteoblasts to lay down dense layers of calcium. The jaw was kept large and wide because it was under constant heavy construction. But with the advent of cooking, the screaming stopped. It became a whisper. The roasted meat offered little resistance. The baked yam yielded easily to the tongue. The massive muscles, once taut as bowstrings, began to slacken. They no longer needed to generate hundreds of pounds of force. And because the muscles weren't pulling as hard, the bone stopped receiving the urgent command to grow. Evolution is a ruthlessly efficient economist. It does not maintain expensive infrastructure that is no longer being used. Muscle tissue is metabolically expensive. It consumes a vast amount of calories just to exist. Bone is heavy to carry. If you don't need a fortress, nature will tear it down and use the materials elsewhere. And so, slowly, imperceptibly, generation by generation, the face began to retract. The heavy sagittal crest on the top of the skull, once the anchor for the chewing muscles, vanished completely, leaving the smooth, rounded cranium. The zygomatic arches, the cheekbones, narrowed. The mandible itself became thinner, lighter, more gracile. The projecting snout, the muzzle of the ape, began to tuck itself in. The face was becoming flatter, more vertical. We were trading bite force for brain power. The energy that was once dedicated to maintaining the massive digestive machinery of the mouth and the gut was freed up to fuel the expanding cerebral cortex. The external stomach of the fire allowed the internal stomach to shrink, and the savings were invested in the neuron. We were becoming smarter, but we were also becoming softer. This softness was not a weakness in the context of survival. We were conquering the globe with our tools and our fire. But it was a catastrophe for the geography of the mouth. Here is the tragedy of the timeline. Evolution is not a synchronized swimmer. Different parts of the body evolve at different speeds. The muscles can atrophy in a single generation of disuse. The bone can reduce its density within a lifetime. But the teeth? The teeth are stubborn. The size and shape of our teeth are controlled by a deep, ancient genetic program that is highly conserved. The blueprint for a molar is written early in fetal development, dictated by signaling pathways that have not changed significantly since the time of the Green Cathedral. The genes that say, "make a tooth this big," did not get the memo that the jaw was shrinking. They were not listening to the crackle of the fire. They were deaf to the softening of the diet. So, while the house was getting smaller, the furniture remained the same size. Imagine the genetic confusion. The jawbone, responding to the new soft diet, stops growing sooner. It halts its forward expansion. The arch becomes shorter, narrower. But deep in the crypts of the maxilla and mandible, the tooth buds are still forming according to the old specifications. They are building teeth meant for a jaw that protrudes like a wolf's, meant for a mouth that grinds bamboo. The trap was being set. It was a trap made of comfort. It was a prison built by our own ingenuity. The more we cooked, the more we processed. The softer our world became, the tighter the space in the mouth became. As the millennia drifted by, the Homo erectus gave way to archaic humans and eventually to us. The fires burned brighter. The cooking became more sophisticated. We invented boiling, stewing, fermenting. We turned grain into porridge and milk into cheese. We created a world of absolute culinary tenderness, and the jaw retreated further. The spark in the dark was the catalyst for our dominance, but it cast the wisdom tooth into the shadows. That third molar, once the king of the dental arch, the essential tool for the elder, began to find itself in a precarious position. The designated throne at the back of the cavern was disappearing. The walls were closing in, but in the era of Homo erectus, the crisis had not yet fully matured. The jaw was smaller than that of the apes, yes, but it was still robust by modern standards. The wear on the teeth was still significant enough to create some room. The wisdom teeth could often still squeeze in, though the fit was becoming snug. It was the beginning of the squeeze, the first chapter of the crowding. Let us return to the scene of the fire. The night is deep. The stars above are crisp and brilliant. The Milky Way a river of light mirroring the river of time. The ancestor has finished their meal. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing coals, breathing heat into the cool air. The group is asleep, a tangle of limbs and soft breathing. In the quiet, the only sound is the popping of a sap pocket in the firewood and the distant hoot of an owl. The ancestor's jaw is relaxed. The muscles are at rest. The teeth are clean, picked by a splinter of bone. Inside the body of this sleeping being, the great trade-off is happening. The stomach is digesting the cooked proteins with ease, sending a surge of glucose to the growing brain. The brain is dreaming, perhaps of the hunt, perhaps of the fire itself, and the jaw is waiting. The fire is a gift, but all gifts have a price. We paid for the fire with the size of our mouths. We paid for our big brains with the crowding of our teeth. We traded the wisdom of the body for the wisdom of the mind. As the smoke drifts up into the night sky, carrying the scent of burnt wood and roasted fat, it signals the end of the primal, raw struggle. We have stepped out of the food chain and into the kitchen. We have left the garden of chewing and entered the age of melting. And deep in the bone, the wisdom tooth waits. It waits for space that is slowly, surely, vanishing into the smoke. The ancient agreement between the tooth and the jaw has been broken. The fire has burned the contract, and we are left to drift downstream towards a future where we are masters of the world, but strangers in our own bodies. The river of time flows on, past the savannah, past the ice ages, winding its way toward the fields of grain and the walls of cities. But that is a story for the next bend in the river. For now, we rest by the first fire, warm, full, and unknowingly changed. The smoke rises. It is a gray, twisting ribbon that connects the earth to the sky, a signal fire of our transformation. We have left the raw, rain-soaked canopy of the deep past, and we have walked through the fire-lit awakening of the early savannah. Now, we find ourselves drifting on the currents of a quieter, subtler epoch. The dramatic spark of the first flame has settled into the steady, comforting glow of the hearth. We are entering the long, slow afternoon of the Pleistocene, a time where the sharp edges of survival are beginning to be filed down, not by the wind or the water, but by the ingenuity of our own hands. The world is still wild, vast, and dangerous. The glaciers still creep and retreat like the slow breathing of a sleeping giant. The herds still thunder across the steppe. But inside the circle of human life, the texture of existence is changing. A profound softening is taking place. It is not a sudden collapse, but a gentle erosion, a gradual weathering of the hard biological imperatives that once ruled our anatomy. Let us center our gaze on the culinary landscape. For millions of years, the menu of the hominid was a testament to resistance. It was a diet of friction. To eat was to engage in a physical battle with the protective mechanisms of nature. The shell of the nut, the husk of the seed, the hide of the prey, the fibrous cellulose of the root, all these were fortresses that had to be breached by the sheer mechanical violence of the jaw. But as the millennia drifted by, like leaves floating down a lazy river, the nature of this battle shifted. The stone tools, once crude and heavy hand axes designed for smashing, became more refined. We began to see the emergence of the scraper, the blade, and crucially, the grinding stone. Picture a woman of this era, kneeling on the packed earth of a shelter made of mammoth bone and hide. Before her lies a flat, river-polished stone, the quern. In her hand, she holds a smaller, rounded stone, the muller. She places wild grains, oats, barley, ancient wheat, onto the flat surface. With a rhythmic rocking motion, she begins to grind, scrape, crush, scrape, crush. This sound is the soundtrack of the revolution. It is the sound of the external tooth. By pulverizing the hard kernels of grain into flour between two stones, she is performing the work that the molars once did. She is outsourcing the labor of digestion. When this flour is mixed with water and baked on a hot stone near the fire, it becomes bread. It becomes soft. It becomes a food that yields to the mouth without a fight. This innovation extended to every corner of the diet. We learned the art of the boil. Perhaps it began with water heated in a skin pouch by dropping red-hot stones into it, a technique that creates a violent rolling boil without a metal pot. Into this bubbling alchemy went the tough, stringy meats of the hunt. Hours of simmering broke down the connective tissues, turning the collagen into gelatin, transforming the unchewable into the tender. Into the pouch went the bitter, toxic tubers, the wild yams and manioc. The heat leached out the poisons and turned the rock-hard starch into a soft, sweet mash. We were creating a world of purees, of stews, of broths. We were inventing the concept of comfort food long before we had a name for it. And as the diet softened, the body began to listen. Biology is a conversation. It is a constant dialogue between the genes we inherit and the world we inhabit. And the loudest voice in this conversation is mechanical stress. The body is an efficient architect. It builds only what is needed. It reinforces the walls that are under attack and dismantles the fortifications that stand empty. Consider the temporalis muscle. In the days of the Green Cathedral and the architecture of force, this muscle was a titan. It was a massive sheet of contractile tissue that fanned out across the side of the head, reaching all the way to the top of the skull. It was constantly engaged, constantly pulling, constantly tense. It was the engine of the crusher. But in the era of the softening, the titan began to sleep. Imagine the sensation of eating a bowl of slow-cooked mammoth stew. The meat falls apart on the tongue. The root vegetables are soft as clouds. The jaw moves. Yes, it opens and closes in a rhythmic cycle. But the force required is trivial. It is a fraction of the power needed to strip raw bark or crack a hickory nut. The temporalis muscle contracts, but it does not strain. It does not bulge. It does not scream for oxygen and blood. The muscle fibers, sensing this lack of demand, began to shrink. The individual cells reduced in size. The massive belly of the muscle, which once filled the temple, began to flatten. The tension that had pulled against the skull bones for 2 million years began to slacken. And the bone, the silent listener, heard the quiet. This brings us to one of the most elegant and ruthless principles of biology, Wolff's Law. This law dictates that bone is a use-it or lose-it tissue. It is not a static sculpture. It is a living bank account of minerals. When a bone is stressed, bent, compressed, pulled, it produces a microscopic electrical signal. This signal calls out to the osteoblasts, the bone-building cells, saying, "Reinforce this area. We are under load." But when the stress disappears, a different signal is sent. The osteoclasts, the bone-resorbing cells, are summoned. They dissolve the bone matrix, releasing the calcium and phosphorus back into the bloodstream to be used elsewhere. Nature is a miser. It is a penny pincher of the highest order. Why maintain a fortress of heavy, dense bone when a simple cottage will suffice? Why spend precious calories building a massive mandible when the food is soft? The message received by the jawbone was a whisper of obsolescence. "You are too big," the body said. "You are over-engineered for this new world of broth and bread." And so, the remodeling began. It was not a painful process. It was not a sudden collapse. It was a slow, generational retreat. The heavy, thick beams of the jawbone began to thin. The broad, expansive arch of the mandible began to narrow. The chin, once a receding slope of bone buried under muscle, began to emerge as the teeth retracted. Look at the face of the ancestor now. The heavy, beetling brow ridge, which had acted as a stress absorber for the violent forces of chewing, began to melt away. The forehead rose, becoming smoother, more vertical. The projecting snout, the muzzle that had led our species into the world, began to retreat. The face was tucking itself in, becoming flatter, smaller, more delicate. We were becoming neotenous. We were retaining the features of our childhood into our adulthood. A flat face, a small jaw, a smooth brow. These are the features of a juvenile primate. By softening our diet, we were, in a sense, domesticating ourselves. Just as the wolf turned into the dog, losing its long snout and massive teeth in exchange for the scraps of the human fire, we were turning into a gentler version of ourselves. The savage grin was being tamed. The mouth, which had once been a terrifying array of weaponry capable of crushing bone, was becoming a tool for communication, for kissing, for the subtle shaping of complex vowels and consonants. The architecture of force was being renovated into the architecture of speech. But there was a disconnect in this renovation, a lag in the system. The shrinking of the jaw was driven by mechanics and culture. It was driven by the cooking pot and the grinding stone. It was a response to the environment. But the teeth? The teeth are driven by genetics. Deep within the spiral staircase of our DNA, the instructions for the teeth remained ancient. The genes that determine tooth size are conservative. They do not respond to Wolff's law. You cannot shrink a tooth by not using it. A tooth is built once, in the darkness of the gum, and it is built to a specification set down in the deep past. So, while the jawbone was listening to the soft whisper of the stew and shrinking in response, the teeth were still listening to the ghost of the Miocene. They were still being built for a world of raw tubers and tough hides. Imagine the mouth as a room. For eons it was a banquet hall, spacious and long, capable of seating 32 guests with room to spare. But now, the walls of the room were moving in. The ceiling was lowering. The floor space was shrinking. But the guests, the 32 teeth, were still arriving, and they were the same size as they had always been. The first molars arrived at age 6, and they found room. The second molars arrived at age 12, and the room was getting crowded, but they squeezed in. And then there was the pause. The long wait for the final guests. The wisdom teeth. The third molars. They waited in the back, developing slowly, their roots growing deep, their enamel crowns hardening. They were oblivious to the changes happening in the bone around them. They did not know that the jaw had become gracile. They did not know that the crushing power they were designed to provide was no longer needed. They only knew the ancient imperative: grow, erupt, grind. As the millennia passed and the culinary landscape became ever gentler, the trap tightened. The agricultural revolution was still to come, but the stage was already being set in the Paleolithic kitchens. Every time an ancestor invented a better way to process food outside the body, they inadvertently stole space from inside the body. The invention of the earth oven, a pit lined with hot stones and covered with dirt to slow-cook meat for days, was a marvel of culinary technology. It produced meat so tender it could be eaten by an infant or a toothless elder, but it also removed the last stimulus for jaw growth. The chewing cycle became a mere formality. We were literally softening our world. We wrapped ourselves in furs to soften the cold. We built shelters to soften the wind. We told stories to soften the fear of the dark. And we cooked our food to soften the hunger. In response, our bodies began to reflect that softness. The jagged edges of our anatomy were smoothed over. The ruggedness of the Homo erectus faded into the more gracile, slender form of Homo sapiens. We were becoming beautiful in a new way, a way that emphasized grace over power, dexterity over brute strength. But this beauty came with a hidden cost, a structural debt that would eventually come due. Let us drift to a specific moment in this era of softening. It is late autumn. The air smells of wood smoke and decaying leaves. A group of hunters has returned, not with a kill, but with baskets woven from reeds, filled with wild grains and nuts. They gather around the fire, the heart of their world. There is a young woman there, perhaps 18 years old. She sits by the fire, grinding the nuts into a paste, mixing it with honey and fat. It is a calorie-dense, delicious meal. As she eats, she feels a dull pressure in the back of her jaw, a throbbing. It is the wisdom tooth, trying to push through the gum. But the jaw is too short. The intense mechanical loading that her ancestors experienced, the chewing that would have stimulated her jaw to grow that extra few millimeters, never happened. Her childhood was filled with soft foods, with cooked meats, with processed grains. Her jaw has reached its genetic potential for this environment, but it has fallen short of its potential for the past environment. The tooth pushes, the bone resists, the pressure builds. She rubs her cheek, wincing slightly. Around her, the group laughs, sharing the warm, soft food under the watchful moon. They are safe. They are well fed. They are the masters of fire and stone. They have conquered the hardness of the world. But inside the silence of her own body, a new struggle is beginning. It is not a struggle against a predator or a storm. It is a struggle of the self against the self. The ancient blueprint is colliding with the modern reality. The wisdom of the deep past is becoming the pain of the present. The fire crackles, sending sparks up into the darkness. The shadows dance on the cave wall, shadows of beings with round heads and flat faces, beings who have traded their heavy jaws for the ability to dream. This was the trade. We bought our civilization with the currency of our anatomy. We purchased the comfort of the hearth with the space in our mouths. And as the fire burns down to embers, the pressure in the jaw remains. A silent, throbbing reminder that we are creatures of two worlds, caught in the drift between the wild and the tame. The softening of the world was a seduction. It lured us in with the promise of ease, of flavor, of security, and we followed it, step by step, bite by soft bite, away from the Green Cathedral and into the cramped, comfortable house of modern humanity. The fortress had become a cottage, cozy and warm, but the furniture of the past was far too big for the room. We drift now into a realm smaller than the grain of sand, yet vaster than the savannah itself. We enter the silent, spiraling library of the blood. Here, in the microscopic darkness of the nucleus, the history of life is written in a chemical alphabet of 4 letters. It is a script that has been copied and recopied for billions of years, handed down from the first single-celled breathers to the complex towering forms of the primates. This is the genome, the ancient scroll of destiny. It is a place of rigorous order, where every gene is a sentence, every chromosome a chapter, telling the body how to build itself. But it is also a place of chaos, where mistakes are made, where typos occur in the frantic copying of the code, and where a single error can rewrite the future of a species. Let us transport ourselves back roughly 2.5 million years. The setting is the Great Rift Valley of East Africa, a landscape of geological violence and stark beauty. The earth here is pulling apart, creating a cradle of lakes and volcanoes. It is night. The air is cool, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. Under the canopy of the Milky Way, which looks exactly then as it does now, a river of diamond dust, a small group of hominids sleeps. They are not yet us, but they are no longer apes. They are creatures on the threshold. Deep within the body of one of these sleeping ancestors, a silent accident occurs. It is not a thunderclap, it is a whisper. In the reproductive cells, as the strands of DNA unzip and replicate to form the seed of the next generation, a tiny stutter happens, a deletion. Two base pairs, two microscopic letters of the code, are dropped. To the indifferent universe, this is nothing. A molecule shifts, a bond breaks. But in the grand narrative of humanity, this is the turning point. This is the moment the lock was broken. The gene in question is known to modern science as MYH16. For millions of years, in every lineage of the great apes, in the gorillas, the chimpanzees, and the robust ancestors of humanity, this gene was a master architect. It was responsible for building the heavy chains of Miocene, the protein filaments that make up the powerful masticatory muscles. It was the instruction manual for the architecture of force we spoke of earlier. It said quite simply, build the jaw muscles thick, build them strong, make them capable of crushing bone. But in this one individual, on this one obscure night in the Pleistocene, the gene broke. The deletion caused a frame shift, a catastrophic garbling of the rest of the sentence. The instruction manual was shredded. The protein could no longer be assembled correctly. The gene became a pseudogene, a ghost in the helix, present but silent, a broken switch that would never be flipped again. In any other epoch, this mutation would have been a death sentence. Evolution is a harsh editor. It deletes the weak. Imagine an ancestor born with this broken jaw in the deep Miocene forest. They would face the hard shell of a nut, the tough fiber of a bamboo stalk, and their muscles would fail. They would gnaw and strain, but the crushing force would not be there. They would starve, their genetic line ending in a quiet, hungry whimper. The broken gene would be washed away by the river of natural selection, a failed experiment. But this was not the Miocene. This was the age of the spark in the dark. The child born with this mutation entered a world that was already changing. This child possessed a jaw that was significantly weaker than its parents. The massive temporalis muscles did not grow to their towering heights. The sagittal crest, the bone ridge on top of the skull, did not form. The face was smoother, smaller, more gracile. By all the rules of the jungle, this child was a runt, a physically inferior specimen. Yet this child did not starve. Why? Because the hand had begun to do the work of the mouth. Because the stone tool had begun to crack the nut. Because the fire had begun to soften the meat. The technological buffer that our ancestors had built around themselves acted as a shield for this genetic accident. The weakness was not fatal because the environment had been altered to accommodate it. The crushing bite was no longer the sole guarantor of survival, and so the mutation survived. It was passed to a son, then a daughter. It spread through the small, intimate population of early Homo. It drifted through the gene pool like a silent tide, carried on the backs of those who relied on wit rather than grit. But here is where the story takes a turn into the profound. The loss of the heavy jaw muscle was not just a loss, it was a trade. It was a liberation. Think of the skull as a puzzle made of bone plates. In an infant, these plates are not fused. They are separated by soft gaps called sutures, allowing the head to pass through the birth canal and the brain to grow. In our primate cousins, the chimpanzee, the gorilla, and the robust Australopithecines, the massive jaw muscles act as a heavy, constrictive helmet. They wrap around the skull, applying constant pressure. These muscles anchor to the sutures, forcing them to fuse early in life. The bone hardens, the box closes, The brain's expansion is physically limited by the very muscles needed to feed it. But when the MYH16 gene broke, that heavy helmet was removed. The massive temporalis muscles shrank to a fraction of their former size. The pressure on the cranial sutures was released. Suddenly, the skull was no longer in a vice. The bone plates remained open and flexible for much longer into childhood. The roof of the cathedral was no longer clamped down. This created a biological vacuum, a room to dream. The brain, driven by other genetic pressures to expand, suddenly found that the walls were not closing in. It could grow. It could push outward, rounding the forehead, expanding the parietal lobes, filling the new space with gray matter. There is a beautiful, haunting irony here. We traded the ability to bite through rock for the ability to think about the stars. We traded the crushing power of the jaw for the expansive power of the mind. The mutation that made us physically weaker made us intellectually limitless. The broken gene was the key that unlocked the cage of the cranium. But evolution is rarely a clean break. It is a messy patchwork process. While the muscles shrank and the skull expanded, a different part of the code remained stubbornly asleep. Deep in the library of the genome, the instructions for the teeth are stored in a different section than the instructions for the jaw muscles. The genes that control the size of the molars, the width of the incisors, the complexity of the roots. These are ancient conservative genes. They are the old guard of the body. They do not change easily. These dental genes did not receive the notification that the MYH16 gene had broken. They did not know that the jaw muscles had atrophied. They were unaware that the jawbone itself, lacking the stimulation of the heavy muscles, was growing shorter and smaller. So, the blueprint for the teeth remained frozen in time. The genetic code continued to issue the order. Build 32 large, robust teeth. Build them for a heavy jaw. Build them for a world of chewing. This is the ghost in the helix. The ghost is the memory of the heavy jaw, preserved in the size of our teeth. Imagine the mouth of an early human, thousands of generations after the mutation. The face is flat. The brow is smooth. The brain is large, humming with the complexities of language and tool-making. But inside the mouth, a traffic jam is forming. The teeth, growing according to their ancient instructions, are emerging into a jaw that has become a cottage. The first molars arrive, and they take up the prime real estate. The second molars arrive, and the space is tight. And then, the wisdom teeth, the third molars, the survival weapons of the past, begin to form. But there is nowhere for them to go. The jaw has ended. The bone has stopped growing. The mutation that liberated our brains trapped our teeth. Let us walk through a day in the life of this transitional era to feel the weight of this change. It is dawn in the Pleistocene. Two distinct species of hominids inhabit the same valley. On one side of the river, in the dense thickets, is Paranthropus boisei, the nutcracker man. He does not carry the mutation. His jaw is a sledgehammer. His skull has a massive crest. He wakes up and immediately begins to forage for sedge and hard roots. He spends his entire day chewing. He is a magnificent biological machine, perfectly adapted to his environment. He feels no pain in his jaw. His wisdom teeth have ample room. On the other side of the river, warming their hands by a smoldering fire, is our ancestor Homo erectus. They carry the mutation. Their faces are smaller, more vulnerable. If a leopard were to attack, they could not bite back with the same ferocity. If the rains failed and the soft food disappeared, they would struggle to eat the hard roots that the nutcracker man consumes with ease. But look at what they are doing. They are not chewing. They are talking. The smaller jaw, the more flexible tongue, the released cranium. All of these allow for a new kind of survival. One of them is napping a piece of flint, creating a sharp edge that is sharper than any tooth. Another is tending the fire, an external stomach that digests the world. The paranthropus watches them from the bushes, his massive jaw grinding rhythmically. He is the perfection of the past. They are the flawed promise of the future. He will go extinct in 1,000,000 years, his specialization becoming his cage. They will inherit the earth, their broken gene allowing them to adapt to every corner of the planet. But the cost of that inheritance is carried in the mouth of every modern human. The ghost in the helix is not just a metaphor. It is a physical reality that you can see on an X-ray. It is the impacted wisdom tooth, lying sideways in the bone, pressing against the nerve. It is the silent scream of a part of our body that remembers a different world. When we feel the ache of a wisdom tooth, we are feeling the friction between two chapters of our evolutionary history. One chapter, written in the muscles and the skull, tells the story of our liberation, our softening, our brain expansion. The other chapter, written in the enamel of the teeth, tells the story of our primal origins, our need for force, our life as chewing machines. The two chapters do not match. We are a biological rough draft, a work in progress. And yet there is a beauty in this mismatch. It is a reminder that we are made of time. We are not designed from scratch. We are assembled from the spare parts of our ancestors. The broken MYH16 gene is a scar, yes, but it is a scar that tells a story of survival. As the sun sets on the Rift Valley, casting long shadows across the savannah, we see our ancestors smiling at the fire. It is a smaller smile than before. The teeth are crowded, the jaw is slight, but behind that smile, the mind is racing, inventing, dreaming. The heavy armor has been cast aside, left in the dust of the gene pool. The ghost whispers in the helix, a quiet echo of the bite we lost. But the voice that speaks around the fire, the voice of storytelling, of wisdom, of love, is loud and clear. We lost the jaw of the beast, but we gained the voice of the human. And in the silence of the genome, that was a trade worth making. The silence that followed the breaking of the gene was not an empty silence. It was the hush of a heavy door swinging open, revealing a chamber that had been sealed since the dawn of the primates. We stand now in the aftermath of the mutation, in the quiet revolution of the anatomy. The massive cables of the temporalis muscles, which once encased the skull in a grip of iron, have slackened. The heavy sagittal crest, that bony mohawk of the ancestors, has dissolved back into the smooth curvature of the cranium. And in this newfound biological quiet, a remarkable possibility emerged. The constraints on the skull were released. Imagine standing inside a great cathedral where the ceiling has been oppressively low, a stone lid pressing down upon the congregation. Then, miraculously, the architects of life decide to raise the roof. The heavy beams are removed, the buttresses are pushed back. The space above opens up, soaring into the darkness, creating a vaulted emptiness that begs to be filled. This is what happened to the skull of our ancestors. The brain case, previously locked in a vise of muscle and bone, was free to expand. It is difficult for us, the owners of these expansive, domed heads, to understand the sheer physical pressure under which our ancestors lived. For millions of years, the act of chewing was the dominant force shaping the head. The muscles required to grind the wild, raw world were so powerful that they acted as a biological straitjacket for the brain. They anchored onto the skull plates, fusing the sutures, the seams where the bone grows, shut at an early age. The brain of an ape reaches its full size quickly, hitting a wall of bone that will not yield. The potential for growth is strangled by the necessity of hunger. But with the muscle weakened, the vice was loosened. The sutures of the skull, those jagged lightning bolt cracks that traverse the cranium, remained open. They remained soft. The fontanelle, the soft spot on an infant's head, lingered longer into childhood. The helmet was no longer welded shut, and nature, as we know, abhors a vacuum. Into this new, luxurious space the brain began to grow. This was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, creeping tide of gray matter. It was the growth of the neocortex, the new bark of the brain. This is the outer layer, the wrinkled, folded landscape of tissue that houses the miracles of consciousness. It is a greedy, hungry tissue, demanding energy, demanding blood, demanding room. And for the first time in history, the room was there. Let us watch this expansion as if through a time-lapse camera positioned deep within the skull. The frontal lobes, the seat of planning and foresight, pushed forward, filling the space behind the high forehead that was beginning to rise. The parietal lobes, the integrators of sensory information, ballooned outward, rounding the sides of the head. The temporal lobes, the keepers of memory and language, deepened and complexified. The brain was unfurling. It was a flower blooming in the dark, encouraged by the softening of the jaw. We traded the ability to crack nuts for the ability to wonder at the stars. This is the fundamental transaction of our species. It was a barter made in the silence of the body. We gave up the crushing bite, the jaw that could shear through bone, and in return, we received the capacity to dream. We traded the security of instinct for the terrifying freedom of imagination. To understand this trade, we must walk in the footsteps of an ancestor living through this transition. Let us call him Homo habilis, the handyman, or perhaps an early Homo erectus. He stands on the edge of the Olduvai Gorge. It is night. The air is thick with the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of wildebeest. In the past, his ancestors would have been asleep, their minds quiet pools of simple survival. Hunger, fear, lust. These were the ripples that disturbed the surface. But this ancestor is awake. He is looking up at the sky. His jaw is weaker than his grandfather's. If he were to bite into the raw tuber of a sedge plant, his jaw might ache. He relies on a sharp stone flake to cut the skin of the antelope. He relies on the pounded softness of the food. But because his jaw is weak, his mind is strong. He looks at the stars, and he does not just see points of light. He sees patterns. He sees a hunter chasing a lion. He sees the campfire of the ancestors in the sky. He connects the dots. This act of connection, of seeing what is not physically there, is the gift of the neocortex. It is the birth of the symbol. He looks at the stone in his hand. He does not just see a rock. He sees the tool hidden inside it. He imagines the future. He simulates reality in the theater of his mind before he strikes the blow. If I hit it here, it will break there. This creates a parallel universe, a world of what if, that exists only in the expanded cathedral of his skull. This ability to simulate, to plan, to tell stories was the ultimate survival tool. It was far more powerful than any jaw muscle. A strong jaw can crush a nut, but a strong mind can invent a spear. A strong jaw can fight a predator, but a strong mind can tame fire. We were physically disarming ourselves, laying down the weapons of the bone to pick up the weapons of the intellect. But biology is a game of space. It is a game of geometry and balance. You cannot simply add a massive, heavy organ to the front of the spine without consequences. As the brain case expanded forward and outward, the center of gravity of the head shifted. To balance this heavy, precipitous globe of tissue atop the slender column of the neck, the architecture of the face had to change. The face had to tuck itself underneath the cranium. This is the great retraction, the orthognathic shift. Picture the profile of the primate. The chimpanzee, the gorilla, the Australopithecine, they are defined by prognathism. Their faces project forward, leading with the mouth. The jaw is the prow of the ship, cutting the air. The eyes are set back, behind the muzzle. They are creatures who interact with the world mouth first. Now, watch the transformation. As the brain blooms, pushing the forehead out, the jaw begins to retreat. It swings backward, like a pendulum returning to center. The snout shortens. The heavy, protruding muzzle that had defined our lineage for 20 million years begins to dissolve. The face becomes vertical. The nose, once a flat opening on a long snout, becomes a projecting beak of cartilage, standing alone on a flat landscape. The chin, previously non-existent, a mere slope of bone, begins to jut out as the teeth retract behind it. The jaw grew shorter, tucked politely beneath the eyes. It was a gesture of biological humility. The mouth was stepping back to make way for the eyes and the brain. We were becoming creatures of vision and thought, rather than creatures of smell and taste. The real estate of the mouth was being rezoned for the palace of the mind. Think of the head as a building site with a strict zoning law. You only have so much bone to work with, and you only have so much space to balance on the neck. The architects of evolution decided to build a library on the upper floors. To support this massive library, the kitchen on the ground floor had to be downsized. The kitchen is the mouth, and the downsizing was ruthless. The maxilla, the upper jaw, retracted backward, fusing with the bones of the nose and the cheek to create the flat mid-face we see in the mirror today. The mandible, the lower jaw, shortened its length, the angle of the jaw becoming more acute. The expansive U-shaped arch of the teeth, which once had room for everything, was being compressed into a parabolic curve. This was not a mistake. It was a necessary compromise. A long, heavy snout combined with a massive, heavy brain would have been impossible to support. The neck muscles would have failed. The head would have slumped forward. To carry the weight of our genius, we had to lighten the load of our hunger. But there was a silent victim in this rezoning, a tenant who had not been evicted, but whose room was being demolished around them. The teeth. We must return again to the stubbornness of the teeth. As we have whispered before in this dark chronicle, the teeth obey a different master. They obey the deep, ancient code of the enamel. They are not easily swayed by the shifting trends of bone and muscle. As the face flattened, as the jaw tucked itself under the brain, the teeth remained loyal to the old dimensions. They were still expecting the long, protruding muzzle of the ape. They were still expecting the wide, generous arch of the forest dweller. The room to dream for the brain became the room to suffocate for the teeth. Let us visualize the collision of these two evolutionary trajectories. It is a slow-motion crash happening over thousands of years. The brain pushes out, the jaw pulls in. The brain demands more space for neurons. The jaw surrenders space for teeth. The incisors and canines, standing at the front of the mouth, felt the squeeze first. They began to jostle. In many modern humans, we see the result. crooked bottom teeth, crowding, incisors that twist sideways. This is not a disease. It is the physical evidence of our brain's victory over our jaw. But the true crisis was reserved for the back of the mouth, for the wisdom teeth. They were the furthest back, the last to arrive, the final passengers on a train that was rapidly shortening. As the jaw tucked under the skull, the space behind the second molar, the retromolar space, began to vanish. The hinge of the jaw moved closer to the teeth. The vertical ramus of the mandible, the part that goes up to the ear, moved forward. The designated throne for the wisdom tooth was being walled over. Imagine the confusion of the developing tooth bud. It lies deep within the bone, absorbing calcium, building its crown, preparing for its moment of glory. It follows the chemical signals that have guided its ancestors for eons. Up and out, the signals say. Take your place at the end of the line. But when it tries to rise, it hits a wall of bone. Or it hits the roots of the second molar. It is trapped. It is impacted. This impaction is the physical price of our intelligence. Every time a teenager lies in a dentist's chair, waiting for the extraction of a wisdom tooth, they are paying the tax on their neocortex. They are suffering the consequences of the trade we made on the savannah. We bought the ability to understand calculus, to compose symphonies, and to build civilizations. And the currency we used was the space in our jaws. We are a species of trade-offs. We are not perfect designs created on a drawing board. We are a series of negotiations between competing needs. The need to think outpaced the need to chew. The need to dream outpaced the need to bite. Let us return to the ancestor, the stargazer. He does not know that his descendants will suffer this crowding. He only knows that his mind is alive with a new kind of fire. He holds the stone tool, and he plans his tomorrow. He is the first creature on earth to truly inhabit the future. The wind blows across the Rift Valley, rustling the grass. It carries the scent of rain, a scent that the ancestor can now name, can now weave into a story of the coming season. He turns back to his group, to the fire. His face, illuminated by the flames, is flat and vertical. It is a human face. It is a face that has surrendered its weaponized snout to become a canvas for expression. With this new, flat face, he can smile. He can frown. He can communicate complex emotions that a muzzle never could. The retraction of the jaw allowed for the complex musculature of facial expression to develop. We lost the ability to tear throats, but we gained the ability to show empathy, to signal trust without a word. And within the skull, the dream continues to expand. The neurons fire in complex webs, creating language, creating myth, creating the very concept of self. The roof of the cathedral has been raised, and the music that fills it is the symphony of human consciousness. But outside, in the cold reality of the bone, the walls are closing in. The era of the spacious mouth is over. The era of the crowded, compromised, uniquely human jaw has begun. The palace of the mind is magnificent, yes, but the basement is full, and the doors are locked, and the ancient ghosts are restless in the dark. And so we walk forward into history, leading with our foreheads, our jaws tucked safely away, carrying the universe inside our skulls and a dilemma inside our gums. The balance is struck. The contract is signed. The room to dream has been secured, but the cost will be paid in the ache of the bone, echoing down through the generations to the very pillow where you lay your head tonight. In the quiet of your own room, as you drift toward sleep, feel the shape of your own face. Feel the high forehead, the vertical drop to the chin. You are touching the architecture of the trade. You are touching the victory of the dream over the grind. The silence in your jaw is the silence of a battlefield where the mind won and the mouth surrendered. Let the dream take over now. The jaw is at rest. The work of evolution is done for the day. The cathedral is open, and the stars are waiting. The hunter's breath. The world has turned white. The lush, suffocating canopy of the Green Cathedral is a distant memory, buried under millions of years of geological sediment. The warm, golden embrace of the savannah has retreated, pushed back by the encroaching fingers of the frost. We have arrived in the era of the Great Silence, the Pleistocene at its zenith, the Ice Age. Imagine standing on the edge of the Mammoth Steppe, a vast, treeless ocean of grass and permafrost that stretches from what is now France to the far reaches of Siberia. The air here is not the humid soup of the jungle. It is a crystalline blade. It is crisp, thin, and painfully pure. To breathe, it is to drink from a glacier. The sky is a pale, washed-out blue, a dome of indifference that watches over a landscape locked in a cryogenic slumber. The wind does not rustle leaves here. It howls. It scours the earth, polishing the stones and freezing the breath before it leaves the lips. In this stark, monochromatic theater, a figure moves. It is a human, but it is not the stooped, heavy-browed scavenger of the past. This is Homo sapiens, or perhaps a close cousin, standing tall against the horizon. The silhouette is lean, wiry, stripped of all excess. The heavy fur of the primate is gone, replaced by the sewn hides of reindeer and wolf. And the face has changed. Zoom in now, through the swirling snow, to the profile of this wanderer. The protruding muzzle of the ape has vanished completely. The heavy, jutting jaw that acted as a vice for crushing nuts has retreated. The face is flat, vertical, tucked neatly beneath the high, domed forehead. It is a face designed not for biting, but for something else, something that requires a different kind of opening. It is a face designed for breath. We are entering the chapter of the runner. The survival of this creature no longer depends solely on the brute strength of the chewer or the scavenging luck of the walker. It depends on endurance. It depends on the ability to chase, to pursue the great herds of reindeer, horse, and bison across the endless tundra until the prey collapses from exhaustion. This is the persistence hunt, the singular strategy that elevated humanity to the apex of the food chain. And to hunt in this way, to run for hours, day after day, mile after mile, requires oxygen. It requires a massive, uninterrupted flow of air. Consider the engineering challenge here. In our ancient past, the mouth was primarily a food processor. Breathing was the job of the nose. But when the body is pushed to the limit, when the legs are pumping and the heart is hammering against the ribs like a trapped bird, the nose is not enough. The mouth must open. It must become a secondary airway, a vast intake valve for the atmosphere. The anatomy of the throat and mouth had to adapt. The larynx, the voice box, descended lower in the throat. The tongue became shorter and more flexible, arching into the back of the mouth. The snout, which adds weight and creates leverage issues for a runner trying to stabilize their head, was selected against. A flat face is a balanced face. A short jaw is a light jaw. The hunter's breath reshaped us. The wind of the steppe carved our cheekbones and shortened our mandibles just as surely as the wind carves the ice. We became the breathers. We became the voices in the wind. But in this reshaping, in this grand renovation of the airway to fuel the runner's lungs, the dental arch continued its slow, inexorable retraction. The horseshoe curve of the teeth, once a wide U-shaped plaza, was being compressed into a tighter parabola. The room was getting smaller, yet deep in the marrow the stowaway persisted. The third molar, the wisdom tooth. It was a traveler from a bygone era, a piece of genetic luggage packed for a journey that had long since ended. It sat in the back of the jaw, encoded by genes that were deaf to the howling wind of the Ice Age. These genes remembered the hot forests. They remembered the bamboo and the nuts. They did not know that the body they inhabited was now running down mammoths on the frozen plains. And so, the wisdom tooth grew. It formed its roots, thick and divergent. It built its crown, a landscape of enamel peaks and valleys designed for a heavy grind. It prepared to erupt. For these hunter-gatherers, living on the edge of the ice, the situation was precarious. The fit was becoming tight. The retromolar space, that crucial gap behind the second molar where the wisdom tooth needs to sit, was shrinking. In the skulls of our Neanderthal cousins, who lived alongside us in these frozen lands, there was often still a visible gap, a generous space. Their faces were still pulled forward, their jaws longer. But in us, the modern humans, the space was vanishing. However, the trap had not yet sprung. We walked a fine line between the ancient and the modern. The jaw was shrinking, yes, but it was not yet the fragile, understimulated bone of the modern city dweller. The hunter's breath demanded a different face, but the hunter's diet still demanded a working jaw. Let us descend into the sensory reality of a meal in the Paleolithic. It is evening. The sun has dipped below the horizon, painting the snow in shades of violet and bruised indigo. The hunters have returned to the shelter, a tent made of skins stretched over mammoth ribs. Inside, a fire burns. Not a roaring bonfire, but a carefully tended flame fed with bone and dried dung, for wood is scarce. The food is shared. It is meat, but it is not the tender marbled steak of a domesticated cow. It is the muscle of a wild horse, lean, tough, and stringy. It has been dried in the wind to preserve it, turning it into something akin to leather. Or perhaps it is pemmican, dried meat pounded with fat and berries. To eat this food requires effort. Watch the child, sitting by the fire, gnawing on a strip of dried venison. The child pulls, tears, and chews. The jaw moves side to side, a rhythmic, grinding motion that lasts for 20 minutes for a single strip. This is the salvation of the teeth. This vigorous, repetitive chewing sends a powerful signal to the growing bone. It is the same signal we spoke of in the era of the Green Cathedral, but now it is a desperate echo. The periodontal ligament, sensing the strain, screams to the osteoblasts, "Build! Make room! We are working here!" And the bone responds. It grows, it lengthens, it widens. Not to the massive proportions of the ancestors, but just enough. The stimulation of the hunter's diet pries the dental arch open just wide enough to accommodate the full set of 32. In this era, it was common to see a skull with perfect alignment. The teeth were worn flat, yes. By the age of 30, the tops of the molars might be ground down to the dentin, creating a smooth, cupped surface. But they were all there. The wisdom teeth stood in their places, upright and proud, soldiering on at the back of the line. They were often crucial replacements, taking over the chewing surface as the first molars succumbed to the grit of the tundra. The balance was delicate. It was a biological tightrope walk. If the child stopped chewing, if the food became too soft, if the fire did its job too well, The jaw would falter, the growth would stop, and the stowaway would become a prisoner. But for now, the leather and the gristle held the door open. There is a profound duality here, a tension between the air and the earth. The lungs pulled the face inward, demanding a short, efficient airway for the runner. The stomach pulled the jaw outward, demanding a mill for the tough fuel of the tundra. The human face of the Pleistocene was the compromise between these two warring needs. It was a treaty written in bone. Let us step outside the tent again, into the deep freeze of the night. The silence is absolute, save for the crack of the shifting ice in the distance. The aurora borealis unfurls above, a curtain of green and ghostly fire. Under this celestial light, the hunter stands watch. He breathes. The air rushes in through his nose, warming slightly before it hits the lungs. He exhales, a plume of steam rising like a spirit. This breath is the engine of his survival. It allows him to speak, to call out to his kin, to organize the hunt. The shortened muzzle, the descended larynx, these are the instruments of language. The ability to say wolf, or tomorrow, or I love you, is rooted in the same anatomical shift that doomed our teeth. To speak complex vowels, we needed a different shaped throat. We needed the tongue to be able to move rapidly within a smaller oral cavity. We sacrificed the length of the jaw to gain the power of the word. The hunter runs his tongue over his teeth. He feels the grit of the day's meal. He feels the solid, reassuring presence of the third molar at the back, just breaking through the gum. It aches slightly, a teething pain, but it is the pain of growth, not the agony of impaction. There is room. Barely. This tooth is a ghost. It belongs to a world that no longer exists, a world of steaming jungles and fruit-laden branches. It is a biological memory that refuses to fade. It is waiting for the world to return to what it was. But the world never returns. Time is an arrow, not a circle. The hunter does not know that he is the last of the great grind. He does not know that thousands of years in the future, his descendants will invent a way of living that will shatter this delicate balance completely. He does not know about the seeds of wheat and barley that are waiting in the warmer lands to the south. He does not know that the grinding stone will replace the jaw and the pot will replace the tooth. He only knows the cold, and the hunger, and the need to run. The hunter's breath is a story of adaptation at the razor's edge. It is the story of a body that is trying to do everything at once. Breathe like a marathon runner, speak like a poet, and eat like a wolf. It is a miracle that it worked at all. For thousands of years, this equilibrium held. The Ice Age was a stabilizer. It forced a lifestyle that kept the body honest. The cold kept the food tough. The scarcity kept the jaw working. The struggle for calories ensured that the skeleton remained robust. But deep within the genome, the blueprint for the teeth remained frozen, unedited. The silent error was still there, lurking. The ancient instruction, make 32 big teeth, was being copied over and over again, generation after generation. It was a ticking time bomb, the timer set by the softness of the diet. As long as the meat was tough, the bomb would not detonate. As long as the child chewed on leather, the fuse was damp. But the ice is beginning to melt. The great glaciers are receding. The water is rising. The herds are moving north. And in the fertile crescents of the world, the grasses are growing tall and heavy with seed. The era of the hunter is ending. The era of the farmer is approaching. And with the farmer comes the porridge. With the farmer comes the bread. With the farmer comes the soft, easy life. The hunter turns back to the warmth of the tent. He crawls under the furs, his breathing slows. The wisdom teeth in his jaw settle into the bone, secure for one more night. The ghost is safe. The stowaway is hidden. But outside, the wind changes direction. The scent of a new world is in the air, a world where the jaw will finally surrender and the trap, set millions of years ago in the green silence of the beginning, will finally, painfully, spring. The fine line is about to be crossed. The ghost in the helix is about to wake up in a room that is too small to hold it. And the ache that begins as a dull pressure in the hunter's jaw will become the screaming rite of passage for the civilization to come. We leave them there, sleeping in the snow, the last humans to be fully whole. The last to possess the face of the future and the function of the past. The last to breathe the hunter's breath through a mouth that could still hold the wisdom of the ancients. The silent retraction. The wind moves across the high plateaus of the late Pleistocene, a ceaseless, invisible river that scours the earth. It whistles through the scrub brush and flutes over the edges of the limestone cliffs. In this vast, open theater of the prehistoric world, gravity is the oldest and most exacting god. It pulls on everything. It weighs the stone, the water, and the bone. For a creature attempting to stand upright, to defy the horizontal order of the animal kingdom, and balance a heavy sphere of a head atop a slender column of a spine, gravity is the constant negotiation. It is the silent partner in every step, every run, every turn of the neck. We drift now into the physics of our own elegance. We have left the heavy, knuckle-walking gait of the forest floor far behind. We have become the vertical masters of the plains. But this mastery came with a strict architectural requirement: balance. Consider the mechanics of a lever. In our primate cousins, the chimpanzee, the gorilla, the head hangs forward from the spine. To keep that heavy, protruding face from drooping onto the chest, massive neck muscles are required. These muscles act as counterweights, thick cables of flesh constantly pulling back against the drag of the earth. But as the genus Homo began to stand taller, as the foramen magnum, the hole where the spine enters the skull, migrated to the center of the base of the cranium, the rules changed. We became a balancing act. We became a column. To maintain this delicate equilibrium with efficiency, to run for hours without the neck muscles screaming in agony, the head needed to be light. It needed to be streamlined. The heavy muzzle, the protruding snout of the past, was a liability. It was a weight at the end of a lever that we could no longer afford to carry. And so, evolution, the great economizer, began the work of the silent retraction. It was not a violent amputation. It was a slow, graceful erosion, like the weathering of a canyon wall by a gentle stream. Over thousands of generations, the heavy slab of the mandible began to recede. The thick, dense bone that had once been built to absorb the shock of crushing rocks began to thin. The chin, that uniquely human feature, emerged not because we added bone to the tip of the jaw, but because the alveolar bone, the bone holding the teeth, retracted, leaving the point of the chin standing alone like a cliff revealed by a receding tide. The mandible became more gracile. This is a word of rare beauty in the scientific lexicon. Gracile. It implies slenderness, grace, a fragility that is also a refinement. Compare the jaw of a Homo erectus to the jaw of a modern human, and you are comparing a sledgehammer to a scalpel. You are comparing the heavy masonry of a fortress to the delicate filigree of a cathedral spire. The bone, which grows and strengthens only under the stress of use, received a quieter message. We spoke in previous chapters of the softening diet, the fire, and the tools. These were the external causes. But here we speak of the internal imperative, the need for lightness. Nature favors the efficient. Energy is the currency of life, and nature is a miser who counts every calorie. Why build a fortress of bone when a cottage will suffice? Why spend precious metabolic resources maintaining a massive jawbone when a lighter, smaller one allows the head to float atop the spine with effortless grace? So, the face tucked itself in. The profile became vertical. The weight was centered. We became aerodynamic in a biological sense, streamlined for the long-distance run, our heads balanced perfectly to scan the horizon. The savage grin was being tamed, the heavy weaponry of the mouth dismantled to make way for the agile, communicative, lightweight face of the modern human. But there is a flaw in this pursuit of elegance, a discrepancy in the blueprints. While the bone is a plastic tissue, meaning it is moldable, responsive to the environment, capable of shrinking when not used and growing when stressed, the teeth are different. The teeth are stubborn. They are the hardliners of our anatomy. Let us journey from the wind-swept plains to the warm, dark, fluid world of the womb. Here, in the microscopic silence of fetal development, the future is being written. It is a time of folding and unfolding, of cells migrating like ancient tribes to find their homelands. Long before the infant takes its first breath, long before the jaw has even finished forming its shape, the teeth are being dreamed into existence. The size of our teeth is determined by a complex interplay of genetics that operates on a deep, ancient clock. These are genes with names like BMP4, bone morphogenetic protein 4, and FGF8, fibroblast growth factor 8. They act as signaling pathways, molecular whispers passed between the epithelial tissue and the mesenchymal tissue. They say, build a molar here, make it this wide, give it 4 cusps, make the roots deep. These genetic instructions are conservative. They are the Old Testament of the body, handed down with very little revision from our distant ancestors. They do not know about the fire. They do not know about the stone knife. And most crucially, they do not know about the need for a lighter head. The genetic clocks that control tooth size are ticking at a different speed than the evolutionary pressures that are shrinking the jaw. The jaw is shrinking on ecological time, adapting relatively quickly to the changes in diet and posture. The teeth are stuck in deep time, preserving the dimensions that worked for millions of years. And so we were left with a mismatch, a biological discordance, a silent collision between the container and the contents. Imagine, if you will, a grand construction project. The architect, let us call him natural selection, has decided to downsize the house. He looks at the blueprints and says, we no longer need the great hall. We no longer need the sprawling dining room. We need a compact, efficient, modern structure. We need a cottage. And so the walls are brought in. The ceiling is lowered. The floor plan is tightened to conserve materials and improve the balance of the structure. But the builder, the genetic code, is working from an old manifest. He continues to order the furniture for the mansion. He orders the banquet tables. He orders the heavy oak chairs. He orders the grand piano. These are the incisors, the canines, the premolars, and the massive molars. They are manufactured in the factory of development with precise prehistoric dimensions. And then the delivery trucks arrive. The furniture is carried into the house. The incisors go into the front room. They fit, but they are snug. The canines are squeezed in next to them. The premolars take their places. The room is filling up. The walls are closer than they should be. The silent retraction of the walls has outpaced the downsizing of the furniture. And finally, the last delivery arrives. The massive, three-rooted, four-cusped banquet tables known as the wisdom teeth. The movers try to bring them in through the back door, but the room is full. The walls have closed in. There is no floor space left. This is the reality of the human mouth. It is a room that has become impossibly small for the furniture it is forced to hold. Let us return to the day in the life of an ancestor to feel the creeping onset of this mismatch. We are in the late Paleolithic. The ice is retreating, leaving behind a scarred, wet world. A young woman sits by a stream, washing the ochre from her skin. She is beautiful in the way of her people. High cheekbones, a high forehead, a face that is flat and expressive. She runs her tongue along the inside of her cheek. She feels a ridge of flesh, a tension. She is 18 years old. Her jaw has finished growing. The trajectory of her development, guided by the soft food of her childhood and the genetic command for a gracile face, has created a mandible that is elegant and short. But deep in the bone, the third molars are waking up. They have finished their calcification. They are ready to emerge. They push upward, driven by the relentless force of eruption. But they hit the wall. The vertical ramus of the jaw, the bone that goes up to the ear, is right there. The second molar is right there. The tooth is trapped. It begins to twist. It tilts sideways, diving into the root of its neighbor. The young woman feels a dull, throbbing ache that radiates into her ear. It is not an infection, not yet. It is the pressure of history. It is the physical sensation of the mismatch. Her body is fighting itself. Her modern jaw is at war with her ancient teeth. She dips her hand into the cold water of the stream and presses it against her jaw. The cold numbs the ache. She does not know that she is suffering from a condition that will plague billions of her descendants. She does not know that this pain is the price of her balance, the tax she pays for the ability to run lightly across the earth. This silent retraction was not a mistake, per se. It was a trade-off. Evolution is always a negotiation between competing needs. We needed to be smart. We needed to be balanced. We needed to be efficient. To gain these things, we had to sacrifice the robust perfection of the mouth. The tragedy, if we can call it that, is that the different parts of the body listen to different masters. The bone listens to gravity and muscle. The teeth listen only to the ancestors. Consider the enamel itself. It is the hardest substance in the human body. It is 96% mineral. Once it is formed, it is dead. It cannot change shape. It cannot shrink. It cannot adapt. A bone can remodel itself. If you break a leg, it heals. If you start lifting weights, your bones get denser. But a tooth? A tooth is a diamond. It is cast in stone before it ever sees the light of day. It is immutable. This immutability is what makes the mismatch so inevitable. If the teeth were plastic, like the bone, they might have sensed the shrinking jaw and reduced their size. They might have said, "The room is getting small, let us become smaller chairs." But they cannot. They are rigid monuments to a bygone era, dropped into a changing landscape. As the generations passed, the mismatch grew more pronounced. In the early days of the retraction, there was often just enough room, a squeeze, but a manageable one. But as culture accelerated, as we moved from the campfire to the village, from the wild grain to the soft bread of the agricultural revolution, the jaw shrank further. The environmental component of the jaw size, the lack of chewing stress, compounded the evolutionary component, the selection for a smaller face. We were attacking the space from both sides. Evolution was shrinking the jaw for balance, and lifestyle was shrinking the jaw from disuse. And all the while, the genetic clock of the teeth kept ticking, 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 churning out the same big teeth for a world that was vanishing. The silence of the retraction is what makes it so haunting. It happened without fanfare. No alarms went off in the genome. No pain receptors fired during the slow, generational shrinking of the bone. It was only at the very end, when the tooth tried to enter the room, that the silence was broken by the cry of the individual. It is a ghost story written in calcium. The ghost is the space that used to be there. The retromolar gap, the space behind the last tooth, is a void that we have lost. In Neanderthals, you could put a finger in that gap. In us, there is nothing, just the collision of tissue and bone. Let us stand back and look at the human face again, floating in the darkness of history. It is a masterpiece of reduction. The brow is smooth, the chin is defined, the cheeks are hollowed. It is a face capable of infinite subtlety. It can express irony, sorrow, hope. It is a face that has shed the armor of the past to reveal the vulnerability of the present. But inside, it is crowded. The silent retraction is a reminder that we are not finished products. We are a mosaic of different timelines. Our feet are adapted for the savannah. Our backs are adapted for the trees and suffer for it. Our brains are adapted for the future, and our jaws are a compromise that hasn't quite worked out. We carry the furniture of a giant in the cottage of a human. We are walking contradictions, and every time we feel that pressure in the back of the mouth, we are feeling the friction of our own becoming. We are feeling the biological discordance of a species that changed its address faster than it could unpack its boxes. The wind continues to blow across the Pleistocene steppe, eroding the cliffs, smoothing the stones. And in the same way, the invisible wind of evolution continues to smooth our faces, tucking them in, lightening the load, preparing us for a future where the bite matters less and less, and the mind matters more and more. The retraction continues, silent and relentless, and the teeth wait in the dark, wondering where the room has gone. The seeds of change. The silence of the ice was breaking. If you could stand on the ridge of the world 10,000 years ago, you would hear the sound of a planet waking from a long, frozen slumber. It was a sound of dripping, of rushing, of cracking. The great white glaciers, which had held the northern hemisphere in a grip of iron for millennia, were retreating. They withdrew like a beaten army, pulling back toward the poles, leaving behind a scarred, scoured landscape of mud and stone. And as the ice pulled back, the water rose. The rivers swelled, turning from trickles into torrents, carrying the silt of the mountains down to the valleys. The coastlines shifted, drowning the land bridges that our ancestors had once walked across. The world was becoming warmer, wetter, and greener. The Pleistocene was exhaling its last cold breath, and the Holocene, the epoch of the garden, was inhaling its first. In this new, verdant world, humanity stood at a crossroads. For 200,000 years, we had been the wanderers. We were the children of the horizon, moving with the seasons, following the herds, reading the wind. Our lives were defined by the search. We were the ultimate opportunists, eating what the land provided, the scavenged carcass, the wild berry, the tough root dug from the hard earth. We were guests in nature's house, taking only what was offered and moving on. But then, in a few scattered pockets of the globe, in the crescent of fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates, in the humid valleys of the Yangtze, in the high volcanic plateaus of Mesoamerica, a radical idea took root. It was an idea more powerful than fire, more transformative than the stone tool. It was the idea of staying. It began with a notice, a subtle observation made by a woman or a man whose name is lost to the winds of time. They noticed that where the wild grasses grew, the emmer, the einkorn, the barley, the seeds that fell to the ground in the autumn sprouted anew in the spring. They realized that they did not have to search for the plant. They could help the plant. They could clear the weeds. They could water the soil. They could save the best seeds and bury them with intent. This was the seeds of change. It was the moment humanity knelt to the earth, not to forage, but to plant. The agricultural revolution was born. It was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, creeping dawn. It was a contract signed between the human and the grass. We promised to protect the grain, to spread its progeny, to clear the forest for its fields. And in return, the grain promised us security. It promised us a harvest that could be stored. It promised that we would never have to walk into the hungry dark again. But every contract has a cost, and the cost of this new security would be paid, silently and slowly, by the architecture of the human face. We traded the wild, diverse, chewy diet of the forager for the consistent, soft staples of the farmer: wheat, rice, corn, barley, millet. These were the new gods of our survival. They were reliable, they were abundant, and they were calorie-dense. But they were physically different from the foods that had shaped us. Consider the texture of the pre-agricultural world. A meal in the Paleolithic was a workout. It was a strip of dried bison meat, tough as leather, requiring hundreds of chews to soften. It was a wild carrot, fibrous and woody, covered in grit. It was a handful of mongongo nuts, hard as stones. The jaw had to work, the muscles had to strain, the bone had to endure. But the grain of the Neolithic was different. You cannot eat raw wheat. It is hard, indigestible, and offers little nutrition. To unlock its energy, you must process it. You must destroy its structure before it enters your mouth. And so, we invented the tools of the softening. Picture the scene in a Neolithic settlement, perhaps in the walled city of Jericho or the stone circles of Göbekli Tepe. The sun beats down on the mud-brick dwellings. In the courtyard, the women are working. They are kneeling before heavy stones, the saddle querns. They take the harvested grain and place it on the concave surface. Back and forth, they push the grinding stone. The rhythm of the grind becomes the heartbeat of the village. Under the pressure of the stone, the hard kernel of the wheat is crushed. The tough outer husk is pulverized. The structure of the seed is obliterated, turning into a fine, soft powder. Flour. This was the first step in the Great Reduction. We were using stone teeth to do the work that our biological teeth used to do. But the softening did not stop there. We had also discovered the magic of the clay. We dug the earth from the riverbanks, shaped it, and fired it. We invented pottery, and with pottery came the ability to boil. In the days of the hunters, cooking was mostly roasting over an open flame. Roasting preserves some of the toughness of the food. It requires the meat to be torn. But boiling? Boiling is the ultimate surrender of texture. We took the flour, mixed it with water, and placed it in the pot. We set it over the fire and let it bubble. The heat and the water worked together to unravel the starches, to break down the proteins, to turn the grain into a smooth, homogeneous sludge. Porridge, gruel, mash. This was the fuel of the first civilizations. It was warm, it was comforting, and it was incredibly easy to eat. You did not need to chew porridge. You could swallow it with a simple press of the tongue against the palate. The violent, rhythmic, forceful grinding that had defined the mammalian mouth for 100 million years was replaced by a gentle, passive slurping. Even the bread we baked was a testament to softness. We learned to ferment the dough, to let the wild yeasts fill it with air bubbles. The resulting loaf was a sponge. It was delicious, yes. It smelled of home and safety. But to the jawbone, it was a message of silence. This shift was catastrophic for the anatomy of the face. To understand why, we must listen to the language of the bone. We tend to think of our skeleton as a steel scaffold, a rigid, dead structure that simply holds us up. But bone is not steel. Bone is a dynamic, living tissue. It is a river of calcium and collagen that is constantly flowing, constantly reshaping itself in response to the world around it. There is a law in biology known as mechanotransduction. It is the process by which cells sense physical forces and translate them into biochemical signals. In the jaw, this process is governed by the periodontal ligament, the microscopic hammock-like structure that holds the tooth in the socket. When a child in the Paleolithic chewed on a tough root, the force of the bite was transmitted through the tooth, into the ligament, and finally into the jawbone. This force was a signal. It was a shout. It told the osteoblasts, the bone-building cells, to wake up. "Build!" it screamed. "We are under pressure. We need a fortress here. Make the arch wide. Make the bone dense. Lengthen the mandible." The jawbone is what scientists call a use-dependent structure. It does not grow to its full genetic potential automatically. It requires the stimulus of mechanical stress to trigger its complete development. It is like a muscle. If you do not exercise it, it remains small. Now, look at the child of the Neolithic. Look at the child of the first farmers. He is weaned not onto chewed meat or wild plants, but onto soft, boiled gruel. His spoon is a shell or a piece of wood. He eats his fill of wheat paste. He grows strong. He has plenty of calories. But his jaw is silent. The intense, rhythmic chewing of childhood is gone. The heavy loading of the mandible is absent. The periodontal ligament does not scream. It merely whispers. And the osteoblasts, hearing only a whisper, do only a little work. They build a jaw that is sufficient for eating porridge, but they do not build the fortress of the past. The jaw simply stopped growing. It was a failure of potential. The genetic blueprint for a large, robust jaw was still there, written in the DNA, but the environmental trigger needed to unlock that blueprint was missing. The key to the door was mechanical stress, and we had thrown the key away in exchange for the comfort of the bowl. The result was the epidemic of the small jaw. As the generations passed, and the agricultural lifestyle spread from the Middle East to Europe, to Asia, to the Americas, the human face began to collapse inward. The broad, U-shaped dental arch of the hunter-gatherer, which had ample room for every tooth, began to narrow into a V-shape. The palate became high and vaulted, pushing up into the nasal cavity, restricting the airways. The mandible remained short, tucked back, undeveloped. We were fed well, but we were fed too softly. And here, the tragedy of the mismatch reaches its climax. The jaw is a creature of the environment, responsive and plastic. But the teeth? As we have said before, the teeth are creatures of the deep code. They are stubbornly, obstinately genetic. The size of the teeth is determined early in fetal development, long before the child eats their first meal. The genes that control tooth size do not know whether the child will be born into a world of raw bison or a world of boiled wheat. They only know the instructions of the ancestors. And the instructions remain: build big teeth. So the tables and chairs arrived for the banquet, but the hall had shrunk to the size of a parlor. The dental arch collapsed inward, leaving no frontier for the late-arriving wisdom teeth. The mouth became a crowded tenement, packed tight by the ease of our own invention. Imagine the mouth of a teenager in an early farming village. The first molars have erupted, but they are slightly twisted. The incisors are crowded, overlapping like shingles on a roof because there is not enough width in the jaw to stand them side by side. This is the birth of malocclusion, literally bad bite. It is a condition almost unknown in the fossil record of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. You can look at thousands of skulls from the Pleistocene, and their teeth are straight. They are worn, yes, but they are straight. But in the skulls of the early farmers, we see the chaos begin. We see teeth engaging in a slow-motion wrestling match for space. We see the lower jaw trapped behind the upper jaw, creating deep overbites. We see the architecture of the face buckling under the lack of stress. And deep in the back, the wisdom teeth are waking up to a nightmare. They are the third molars, the final laborers. They have formed in the crypts of the bone, expecting the wide, open plains of a Paleolithic jaw. They expect the retromolar space to be waiting for them, a cleared plot of land where they can set down their roots and join the line. But there is no land. The jaw has ended. The growth that should have happened between the ages of 6 and 18, the lengthening of the mandible driven by chewing, never occurred. The village of the mouth is full. The wisdom tooth pushes. It hits the wall of the ramus. It hits the roots of the second molar. It becomes impacted. This impaction is a uniquely modern suffering. It is a disease of civilization. It is the physical manifestation of the disconnect between our biology and our culture. We built a world that was too comfortable for our own bodies. We removed the struggle, and in doing so, we removed the stimulus that made us whole. The seeds of change were not just seeds of grain. They were seeds of a profound anatomical transformation. When we planted the wheat, we domesticated the landscape, but we also domesticated ourselves. We became softer, more gracile, more crowded. Let us drift through the Neolithic evening. The sun sets over the fields of golden barley, rippling in the wind like a sea. The smoke rises from the chimneys of the roundhouses. Inside, the family gathers. They break the soft bread. They dip it into the stew. It is a scene of peace, of abundance, of triumph over the starvation that haunted their ancestors. But listen closely. Beneath the laughter, beneath the crackle of the fire, there is the silent, invisible atrophy of the bone. The jaw is sleeping. The muscles are slack. The potential is fading. And deep within the gum line of the sleeping child, the wisdom tooth waits in its cramped, impossible prison, a stowaway from a wilder time, wondering why the world has become so small, so soft, and so closed. The final act of the shrinking had begun, and we are still living in its echo today. Every time we bite into a soft sandwich, every time we choose the smoothie over the apple, every time we visit the orthodontist to expand the arch that nature left unfinished, we are reenacting the contract we signed 10,000 years ago. We gained the world, but we lost our room. The seasons of the human life are marked by the shifting tides of biology. We begin as fluid, curling embryos. We erupt into the air as soft, crying infants. We stumble as toddlers, and we run as children. But now, we arrive at the threshold of the final physiological maturation. We arrive at the gate of adolescence. It is a time of storms, of hormonal tempests that rewrite the chemistry of the brain, of limbs that lengthen in sudden, awkward spurts, and of a voice that deepens from a child's treble to an adult's resonance. The body is nearly grown. The skeleton, which for 18 years has been a site of frenetic construction, is laying down its final scaffolding. The growth plates in the long bones are beginning to fuse, turning from cartilage to solid, final stone. The architecture of the human form is nearing its completion, but in the quiet darkness of the mouth, the work is not done. Deep in the rear of the jaw, behind the bustling activity of the chewing and the speaking, a secret chapter is still being written. It is a chapter that belongs to the deep past, a biological postscript that is about to collide violently with the reality of the present. The wisdom teeth awaken. Let us descend into the microscopic cavern of the jawbone, into the crypts where these teeth have been sleeping. For years, they have been nothing more than buds, small clusters of potential energy wrapped in a sack of tissue. They have waited while the first molars erupted at age 6, the pillars of the childhood mouth. They have waited while the second molars rose at age 12, the reinforcements of early adolescence. They have lain in the marrow, silent and patient, listening to the chemical signals of the body. But now, the signal changes. The genetic clock, wound tight millions of years ago in the green silence of the Miocene, strikes its hour. A cascade of hormones and growth factors floods the tissue. The command is simple, ancient, and absolute. Rise. The tooth begins to form its roots. This is the engine of eruption. As the roots grow, lengthening downward into the bone, they push the crown of the tooth upward. It is a slow, hydraulic lift. The crown, encased in hard white enamel, a substance as durable as quartz, begins its slow push toward the surface. It is following a chemical beacon, a pathway paved by the breakdown of bone above it and the deposition of bone below it. It is guided by the same navigation system that guided the teeth of the Homo erectus and the Australopithecus. It expects a clear path. It expects the sky. But the sky is not there. As the wisdom tooth rises, pushing through the trabecular latticework of the jaw, it encounters a reality for which it has no map. It hits a wall. To understand this collision, we must visualize the geography of the modern mandible. In the days of the architecture of force, the jaw was a long, protruding beam. Behind the second molar, there was a vast expanse of open bone, the retromolar space. It was a wide, flat plane where the third molar could emerge comfortably, standing tall and straight. But as we have seen, the mill of evolution and the softening of the world have conspired to shorten this beam. The face has retracted. The chin has tucked in. The vertical ramus, the part of the jaw that ascends toward the ear, has moved forward. The plane has vanished. The wisdom tooth is rising not into a field, but into a corner. The collision is slow. It happens not in seconds, but in months and years. It is a geological crash occurring within the span of a single human youth. The tooth pushes. The bone resists. The second molar, rooted firmly in front, stands as an immovable object. The ascending ramus behind acts as an unstoppable force. The wisdom tooth is trapped between the rock of the past and the hard place of the present. They become impacted. This is a word of violence, a word that suggests a sudden jarring crash, a meteor striking the earth, a car hitting a wall. But in the biology of the body, impaction is a silent, creeping violence. It is the violence of a tree root growing under a concrete sidewalk, pushing, lifting, cracking the structure from below with a relentless hydrostatic pressure. The tooth, unable to move vertically, begins to improvise. It is desperate to fulfill its biological directive. "I must erupt," the DNA whispers. "I must find the mouth." And so, like a trapped animal seeking an exit, it turns. Some teeth tilt forward, diving headlong into the roots of the second molar. This is the mesial angular impaction. The crown of the wisdom tooth presses against the neck of its neighbor, a slow-motion battering ram. Over years, this pressure can eat away at the healthy tooth, dissolving the root, causing a resorption that destroys two teeth instead of one. It is a fratricide in the bone, a civil war between the siblings of the dental arch. Other teeth turn backward, facing the bone of the ramus. This is the distal impaction. They try to erupt into the muscle and hinge of the jaw itself, burying themselves deeper into the trap. And some, the most confused of all, turn completely horizontal. They lie flat on their side, deep in the bone, sleeping eternally in the wrong orientation, a permanent testament to the confusion of the code. It is a traffic jam in the bone. But unlike a traffic jam on a highway, which clears with time, this congestion is permanent. The vehicles are made of stone, the road is made of bone, and the drivers are asleep at the wheel, guided only by an obsolete map. Let us focus on the soft tissue aspect of this struggle. As the tooth tries to break through, it pushes against the gum. In a normal eruption, the gum thins and recedes, allowing the clinical crown to emerge cleanly. But in an impacted tooth, the gum is confused. It is stretched. It is pierced, but not cleared. Often, a flap of gum tissue remains draped over the partially erupted tooth. This flap has a name, the operculum. It sounds like a part of a flower or a musical term, but in the crowded chamber of the mouth, it is a trap. Beneath the operculum, a dark, warm, moist pocket forms. It is a perfect sanctuary, not for the human, but for the bacteria that live in the mouth. The mouth is a microbiome, a teeming jungle of flora. Usually these bacteria are harmless, washed away by saliva, scrubbed away by the friction of chewing fibrous food. But under the flap of the gum, the saliva cannot reach. The toothbrush cannot scrub. Food debris, the soft processed sugars of the modern diet, gets trapped under the flap. It ferments. The bacteria feast. They multiply. And suddenly, the survival advantage of the ancient world becomes the modern liability of the infection. The gum tissue swells. It turns red, then purple. It becomes engorged with blood as the body rushes immune cells to the site of the breach. This is the angry and confused response of the system. The body recognizes that something is wrong. It senses a foreign invader. But the invader is its own tooth. The body is attacking itself, trying to reject a part of its own anatomy because there is simply no room for it to exist. The pain begins. It is not the sharp, bright pain of a cut skin. It is the dull, heavy, throbbing ache of deep bone pressure. It radiates. It travels along the nerve pathways, echoing into the ear, throbbing in the temple, pulsing in the neck. It is a pain that speaks of deep compression. It is the feeling of a room that is too full, of a wall that is bowing outward, of a pressure vessel about to burst. This condition is known as pericoronitis, inflammation around the crown. It is a uniquely human affliction. You will not find a chimpanzee in the wild suffering from an impacted wisdom tooth. You will not find a Homo erectus fossil with a horizontal third molar destroying the jaw. Their jaws were wide. Their gums were healthy. Their teeth had room to stand. This pain is the ache of civilization. It is the tax we pay for the agricultural revolution. It is the receipt for the softness of the bread and the tenderness of the stew. We are the only species on Earth that grows body parts it does not have room for. We are the only species that requires surgery to become fully adult. Let us pause and consider the biological irony here. In the Green Cathedral, the wisdom tooth was a savior. It arrived when the elder was 30 years old, just as the other teeth were failing. It was a fresh, grinding surface that could mean the difference between life and death in a starvation winter. It was a gift. Now, it is a threat. In the pre-antibiotic era, before the dawn of modern dentistry, an impacted wisdom tooth was not just a nuisance. It could be a killer. The infection under the gum could spread. It could travel down into the neck, compressing the airway, a condition called Ludwig's angina. It could travel up into the brain. A young adult, in the prime of their life, could die from a fever born in the back of the jaw. The survival advantage had inverted completely. The spare tire had become a bomb in the trunk. This inversion is a stark reminder that evolution is not a benevolent designer. It is a blind process. It does not care about our comfort. It does not plan for the future. It only selects for what works right now. And for millions of years, big teeth worked. Now that they don't, the genetic momentum is too heavy to stop. The ship cannot turn fast enough to avoid the iceberg of our own culture. Imagine a day in the life of a modern adolescent experiencing this. They are sitting in a classroom or staring at a screen, using that massive neocortex that caused the problem in the first place. They feel the throb. They touch the side of their face. The jaw feels stiff. The muscles are guarding the inflamed area. This is trismus, the locking of the jaw. The body, in its confusion, tries to splint the area by tightening the muscles, making it hard to open the mouth. The irony deepens. The jaw is locked shut by the very tooth that was designed to help it chew. The mouth is rendered useless by its own redundancy. Deep in the bone, the roots of the wisdom tooth are still growing, still pushing, unaware of the chaos they are causing above. They are like blind miners digging into a collapse. They are trying to find the light, but they are only finding the dark, crowded roots of their neighbors. There is also a theory, a whisper in the scientific community, about mesial drift. In the ancient world, the vigorous chewing of tough foods caused the teeth to rub against each other. This interproximal wear stripped the enamel from the sides of the teeth, making them slightly narrower over time. A millimeter here, a millimeter there. Across the entire arch of teeth, this wear could create up to a centimeter of extra space. The teeth would naturally drift forward, mesially, to close the gaps. This drift created room at the back for the wisdom tooth to erupt. But we have stopped the drift. Our soft diet causes no wear. Our teeth remain broad and pristine. They do not move forward. The arch does not shorten. And so, the space at the back never opens up. We have preserved our enamel, but we have doomed our wisdom teeth. We have kept the furniture polished, but we have failed to make room for the final guest. The chamber is crowded. The walls are closing in. The biological mandate to grow is colliding with the anatomical reality of stop. As the inflammation rises, as the gum swells, as the pressure builds, the wisdom tooth becomes a silent witness to our history. It is a relic trying to emerge into a world that has literally closed the door on it. It is a visitor from the Pleistocene knocking on the door of the Holocene and finding the locks changed. The crowded chamber is not just a medical condition, it is a philosophical one. It represents the limit of our adaptability. We can change our clothes, our tools, our diets, and our ideas. We can live in the Arctic and the desert. We can fly to the moon. But we cannot escape the bone of our own faces. We cannot wish away the genetic legacy of the grinder. We are trapped in the transition. We are half hunter, half farmer, living in the body of a primate with the mind of a god. And nowhere is this duality more painful, more visceral, or more crowded than in the dark, throbbing corner of the adolescent jaw. The sun sets on the day of the modern human. The lights of the city flicker on. Millions of fires that we did not have to start with flint. We eat our soft dinners. We speak our complex languages. But in the quiet of the night, the pressure remains. The ghost in the helix is pushing against the wall of the present. And there is no way out but through. The night is a heavy curtain drawn across the world. In the suburbs of the modern era, the silence is profound, broken only by the hum of a refrigerator or the passing of a solitary car. It is the deep hour, the wolf hour, usually reserved for dreams. But for you, or for the millions who share this specific rhythmic torment, there is no sleep. There is only the sensation. It starts as a dull pressure, a tightness in the hinge of the jaw, like a fist clenching deep beneath the skin. Then it sharpens. It finds a rhythm. Throb, pause, throb, pause. It beats in time with the heart, a second pulse that dominates the consciousness. It is a hot, expansive ache that radiates upward into the ear and downward into the neck, turning the side of the face into a landscape of misery. To lie awake with the throbbing ache of a wisdom tooth is to feel the friction of evolution in real time. It is not merely a medical inconvenience, it is a haunting. That rhythmic pain is the heartbeat of the past pounding against the walls of the present. It is the physical manifestation of a timeline that has become tangled. In the dark of your bedroom, you are experiencing a collision between the body you were born with and the body your ancestors built. This discomfort is a uniquely modern human experience. It is what anthropologists and pathologists call a mismatch disease, or more poetically, a disease of civilization. If you were to transport yourself back 20,000 years to a cave in the Dordogne, or 40,000 years to the steppes of mammoth hunters, you would find pain, yes. You would find the pain of a broken bone, the pain of a laceration, the pain of hunger. But you would rarely, if ever, find this specific crowded ache. You would not find a young hunter clutching their jaw because their teeth were too big for their mouth. Their mouths were spacious citadels, worn by grit but perfectly aligned. The pain you feel is a receipt. It is the bill coming due for 10,000 years of comfort. It is a sign that our cultural evolution, our mastery of fire, our invention of the fork, our cultivation of the soft, yielding wheat, has outpaced our biological evolution. We changed our world faster than our genes could change our blueprints. And now, in the silence of the night, the discrepancy screams. Let us linger in this sensation of the ache, for pain is a storyteller. The nerve that carries this signal is the trigeminal nerve. It is one of the largest and most complex cranial nerves, a thick cable of sensation that connects the face directly to the brainstem. It is an ancient wire, evolved to protect the most vital parts of the animal, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. When a wisdom tooth pushes against the bone or presses into the root of a neighbor, it triggers this ancient alarm system. But the alarm is confusing. There is no predator biting the face. There is no rock striking the jaw. The attack is coming from within. The call is coming from inside the house. The gum tissue, stretched and torn by the erupting crown, becomes a battlefield. We spoke of the operculum, the flap of gum, in the previous chapter. Now feel it. It is swollen, hot, angry. The immune system, the body's internal army, has rushed to the site. It floods the area with blood, bringing heat and pressure. It is trying to flush out an enemy, but the enemy is a part of the self. It is a biological civil war fought in the millimeter of space between the enamel and the flesh. This inflammation is the body's way of saying, there is a mistake here. It is a rejection of the redundancy. The body is trying to expel the tooth, but the tooth is anchored by deep, twisted roots into the very foundation of the skull. And so, we seek a remedy. We do not go to the shaman. We do not chew on willow bark, though our ancestors might have. We turn to the cathedral of modern medicine. We turn to the dental surgeon. Transition with me now from the dark, private bedroom to the blinding white light of the clinic. The contrast is jarring. The air here is cool, processed, smelling faintly of antiseptic and clove oil. It is a sterile quiet. The chaos of the biological world is banished here, replaced by stainless steel, vinyl, and focused beams of LED light. When we sit in the chair, reclining back, exposing our throats and our jaws to the masked figure above us, we are participating in a profound ritual. It is a rite of passage, a surgical farewell to our deep ancestry. We are here to correct a discrepancy that took eons to create. We are here to excise the last physical vestige of the primal forest. The surgeon looks at the X-ray. There they are, the ghosts in the machine. The wisdom teeth, glowing white on the transparency, tilted, trapped, hopeless. They look like fallen pillars in a ruin. The surgeon speaks of extraction, of roots, of bone removal. The language is architectural, almost geological. They are going to mine the jaw. The anesthesia flows, a pinch, a pressure, and then the numbness spreads. It is a heavy, thick sensation, as if the face is turning to wood. This, too, is a miracle of the modern world. We can silence the trigeminal nerve. We can shut down the ancient alarm system. We can float in a chemical void while the violence is done. And make no mistake, the extraction of an impacted wisdom tooth is an act of controlled violence. It is a primal event disguised as a medical procedure. The surgeon takes the elevator, a tool that looks like a small pry bar. They insert it between the tooth and the bone. They apply force. If you are awake, even through the numbness, you can hear it. It is a sound that travels not through the air, but through the skull itself, conducting directly to the inner ear. Crack. It is the sound of a tree branch breaking in a storm. It is the sound of a root snapping its hold on the earth. It is the sound of the periodontal ligament, the microscopic hammock that has held the tooth since it formed, finally giving way. Sometimes the tooth is too large to come out in one piece. The surgeon must use a drill. The high-pitched whine of the drill is the anthem of modern dentistry. It is the sound of diamond cutting enamel. We are using the hardest materials on Earth, spun at hundreds of thousands of revolutions per minute, to dismantle a structure that nature built to last a lifetime. We are cutting the tooth into quarters, breaking the crown, separating the roots. We are dismantling the furniture to get it out of the room. There is a profound irony in this moment. We are using the very pinnacle of our tool-making ability, the precision drill, the synthetic anesthetic, the refined steel, to fix a problem caused by our tool-making ability. Our tools made our food soft, which made our jaws small, which trapped our teeth. Now, our tools must cut those teeth out. We are in a loop of our own making, using technology to solve the problems of technology. As the tooth is levered out, leaving a gaping, bloody socket in the bone, we are crossing a threshold. The extraction is a form of pruning. We are gardening the human body. We are deciding that the blueprint is wrong, and we are rewriting it with steel. When the procedure is over, we are sent home with gauze packed in our cheeks, tasting the copper tang of our own blood. The numbness fades, replaced by a new, duller ache, the ache of healing. The face swells, turning blue and yellow, the colors of a bruise. We look for a few days like chipmunks, like creatures storing nuts for winter. But in the socket, a miracle of regeneration begins. A blood clot forms, nature's bandage. Fibroblasts migrate into the hole. They begin to weave a web of collagen. Over months, osteoblasts will arrive and lay down new bone. They will fill the crypt. They will erase the memory of the tooth. The hole where the wise tooth sat will become solid, smooth bone. The evidence will be buried. This experience, this ache of civilization, and the surgery that follows, is a shared trauma for the modern species. It binds us together. It is a secret handshake of the industrialized world. "Did you have yours out?" we ask. "Yes, all 4, comes the reply. We nod. We understand. We have all paid the tax. But what does this tax buy us? Why do we suffer this mismatch? We suffer the ache so that we might continue to speak, to think, and to eat the bread of the modern world. The pain is the tension between the body we have and the life we lead. It is the cost of our big brains. Remember the trade we made in the chapter of the dream? We traded the heavy jaw for the vaulted cranium. We traded the crushing muscle for the thinking neuron. Every time a wisdom tooth hits a nerve, it is a reminder of that transaction. The pressure in the jaw is the physical price of the expansion of the mind. It is also the cost of our flat faces. We wanted, or rather, nature selected for, a face that was vertical, balanced, and expressive. We moved the mouth back to make way for the voice. The crowded teeth are the refugees of that retraction. They are the price of our ability to form complex vowels, to whisper, to sing. And it is the cost of our comfort. We suffer because we refuse to starve. We suffer because we refuse to spend 6 hours a day chewing tough roots. We have chosen the soft life. We have chosen the soup, the bread, the cooked meat. We have chosen calorie density and ease. The impacted tooth is the shadow cast by the hearth fire. There is a melancholy beauty in this realization. We are not broken. We are merely unfinished. We are a work in progress, caught in the middle of a great biological shift. Evolution is slow and culture is fast. We are sprinting into the future while our bodies are still walking out of the Pleistocene. As the healing creates a silence in the jaw, as the swelling goes down and the face returns to its normal contours, we are left with a subtle change. We are lighter. We are less archaic. We have been streamlined by the surgeon's hand. The wisdom is gone. The tooth that was meant to save the elder in the forest is now medical waste, perhaps kept in a small plastic box as a keepsake, a white knobby pearl with jagged roots. Hold it in your hand if you kept it. Feel its weight. It is dense. It is heavy. It is a piece of the earth. It looks prehistoric because it is. It belongs in a museum or in the jaw of a hunter standing on the tundra. It does not belong in the mouth of a software engineer or a teacher or a child of the city. The ache fades. The memory of the pain becomes a story we tell. But the silence in the back of the mouth remains. It is the silence of the void. It is the space where the past used to be. We are creatures of the after. We live in the time after the jaw shrank, after the fire was lit, after the tools were forged. We are the survivors of our own ingenuity. And if the price of our big brains, our long lives, and our soft world is a few days of pain and a few minutes of steel in a white room, then it is a price we pay willingly. So tonight, if you are lying awake with that rhythmic throb, know this. You are feeling the turning of the gears of deep time. You are feeling the friction of your own becoming. You are feeling the heavy, clumsy footsteps of your ancestors trying to find a place in your modern life. Let the pain be a meditation. It is a connection to the lineage. It is a reminder that you are an animal, despite your clothes and your screens. You are an organism built of bone and blood, subject to the laws of growth and decay. And tomorrow, when the surgeon removes the intruder, you will leave that part of the animal behind. You will step out of the office, into the sun, a little less wild, a little more modern, and finally, quiet. The ache of civilization will be silenced, leaving only the ghost of the tooth to whisper in the hollows of your bone. The anesthesia fades. It retreats like a tide pulling back from the shore, leaving the coastline of the body exposed once more to the sensation of being alive. The numbness, that thick wooden silence that held the jaw in a state of suspended animation, dissolves into a prickly, warming return of the self. And as the feeling comes back, rushing into the lips, the tongue, and the deep, hollowed-out sockets of the bone, we are left with a profound realization. There is a silence in the jaw. The wise teeth are gone. The pressure that had been building for years, the subtle hydraulic pushing of the past against the present, has finally ceased. The crowded chamber has been cleared. The traffic jam in the bone is over. But in the wake of this departure, in the tender, throbbing aftermath of the extraction, there is not just emptiness. There is a story. The story of the third molar is not erased by the surgeon's steel. It is merely punctuated. It remains etched in our anatomy, a ghost story written in the negative space of the mouth, a narrative of millions of years that has culminated in this singular, quiet moment of healing. We are left floating in the calm waters of the after. The storm of evolution has passed, the lightning of the mutation has struck, the thunder of the chewing muscles has rolled away, and we are drifting in the quiet current of the modern night. It is a time for reflection. It is a time to look at the landscape of the human body and understand what we truly are. We are creatures of compromise. We are not the perfect, seamless machines of science fiction, designed with a singular, streamlined purpose. We are beautiful, chaotic mosaics of the archaic and the new. We are patched together from the spare parts of history, assembled by the blind watchmaker of natural selection who cares only for survival, not for elegance. The empty space behind your second molar, that tender void where the gum is slowly knitting itself back together, is not just a hole. It is a monument to our journey. It is a physical testament to the distance we have traveled from the Green Cathedral to the city of glass and steel. Let us trace the edges of this void with the mind's tongue. It feels strange, does it not? A disruption in the familiar landscape of the self. But that disruption is the very definition of humanity. We are the species that disrupted the natural order. We are the species that changed the rules. Consider the biological tapestry that had to be woven to bring you to this moment of healing. The blood that is now clotting in the socket, forming the dark, crimson seal of recovery, is an ancient technology. It is the same clotting mechanism that saved the life of the ancestor on the savannah when the leopard scratched his arm. It is the same cascade of platelets and fibrin that healed the burns of the firekeeper. The body knows how to heal because it has been broken 1 billion times before. Deep within the socket, The microscopic architects of the bone, the osteoblasts, are waking up. They are migrating into the void, sensing the absence of the tooth. They do not know that the tooth was removed by a dentist. They only know that there is a space that must be filled. They begin to lay down new matrix, weaving strands of collagen, mineralizing them with calcium and phosphorus. They are building a bridge over the chasm. They are erasing the crypt where the wisdom tooth slept for 2 decades. In a few months, the bone will be smooth. The memory of the tooth will be gone from the physical structure, but it will remain in the genetic code. The genes that built that tooth are still there, coiled in the nucleus of every cell in your body. They are waiting to be passed on to the next generation, to build the same big teeth for the same small jaws, to repeat the cycle of the mismatch again and again. This persistence is what makes us a mosaic. We are carrying the baggage of the Pleistocene into the future of the Holocene. We are walking contradictions. Our feet are designed for the soft soil of the earth, yet we walk on concrete. Our eyes are designed for the scanning of the horizon, yet we stare at screens. Our sleep cycles are tuned to the setting of the sun, yet we live in eternal electric light. And our jaws are designed for a diet that no longer exists, housing teeth that no longer fit. To understand this is to forgive your body for its pain. The ache you felt, the swelling, the surgery, it was not a failure of your body. It was a failure of the timeline. It was the friction of a species in transition. We are works in progress. We tend to think of human evolution as a ladder that we have climbed to the top, finishing the ascent when we became Homo sapiens. We view ourselves as the finished product, the masterpiece unveiled. But biology knows no finish line. The river of deep time flows on, and we are merely drifting in the current, changing slowly, imperceptibly, with every generation. The wisdom tooth is a marker of this transition. It is a feature on the chopping block of evolution. In fact, if we look around the human population today, we can see the future taking shape. There are people born today who have no wisdom teeth at all. This condition, known as agenesis, is becoming more common. In these individuals, the genetic instruction has finally been edited. The silent error has been corrected. The ghost in the helix has finally faded away. For them, there is no crowding. There is no impaction. There is no surgery. Their jaws are small, and their teeth are few. They are the next step. They are the gracile future, fully adapted to the soft, cooked world of the seeds of change. But for most of us, we remain in the middle. We are the bridge generation. We are the ones who must bear the burden of the past while living in the comfort of the present. We are the ones who must undergo the rite of passage to reconcile our anatomy. This echo in the bone is a reminder of the price we paid, and it was a high price. Let us return to the central theme of our documentary, the great trade-off. The smallness of our jaws is the direct cost of the vastness of our minds. We cannot have both. We cannot have the crushing power of the Paranthropus and the dreaming power of the Homo sapiens. Nature deals in energy and space, and she demanded a sacrifice. To build a brain that could compose a symphony, we had to dismantle the muscles that could crack a bone. To build a face that could express the nuance of a subtle smile, we had to retract the muzzle that could tear a throat. To build a throat that could shape the complex sounds of language, we had to shorten the oral cavity, crowding the tongue and the teeth. Every time you speak, every time you kiss, every time you smile at a stranger, you are using the features that evicted your wisdom teeth. the flexibility of your face, the lightness of your head, the balance of your skull. These are the gifts you received in exchange for that lost space. Was it a fair trade? Look at the world around you. Look at the tools, the art, the music, the stories. Look at the ability to heal, to understand, to love. Yes, it was a fair trade. We gave up the wisdom of the tooth to gain the wisdom of the mind. We gave up the strength of the bite to gain the strength of the soul. And so, the empty socket becomes a symbol of victory. It is the scar of our humanity. It is the mark of the thinker. Now, as the night deepens and the world outside your window grows quiet, let us bring this journey to a close. Let us travel back one last time, drifting upstream against the river of time, to say farewell to the ancestors who brought us here. See the hunter on the Ice Age tundra, his breath pluming in the cold air, his jaw working on the tough leather of the dried meat. He is strong. He is whole. His wisdom teeth are intact, grinding away the years. Salute him. He survived the cold so that you could have the warmth. See the firekeeper on the savannah, staring into the orange flames, holding the first cooked meal. He is the innovator. He is the one who unlocked the energy of the food. He started the shrinking of the jaw, but he also started the expansion of the tribe. Thank him. He tamed the dark so that you could have the light. See the forest dweller in the Green Cathedral, swinging through the canopy, her massive jaw protecting her, her teeth cracking the hard nuts of the Miocene. She is the mother of the line. She carries the deep code, the strength that still lives in your blood. Honor her. She fought the earth so that you could inherit it. They are all within you. They are the echoes in your bone. They are the ghosts in your helix. They are the architects of the body you inhabit. But now, the timeline collapses into the singular point of the present. It is just you, lying in the dark, safe, warm, and healing. The millions of years of struggle are over. The predators are gone. The starvation is gone. The cold is kept at bay. You are the beneficiary of all that suffering. You are the heir to the kingdom of survival. So, let your jaw relax. Feel the muscles of the cheek, the masseter, the temporalis, the descendants of those mighty titans of the past. Let them soften. They do not need to clench. There is nothing to crush. The world is soft now. The bread is tender. The bed is warm. Unclench your teeth. Let the lower jaw drop slightly, floating in the suspension of the muscles. Feel the space in the joint, the temporomandibular joint, the hinge of your history. Let it be loose. Let the tension drain away, flowing down your neck, into your shoulders, and out into the night. Bring your attention to the space where the wisdom teeth used to be. Do not fear the void. Embrace it. It is quiet there now. The pressure is gone. The war for space is over. The crowded chamber is empty and at peace. Imagine the healing taking place in the dark. The cells knitting together, the blood weaving its tapestry, the bones settling into its new shape. It is a silent, gentle work. It is the body tending to itself with infinite patience. You are exactly as you were meant to be. You are not a mistake. You are a perfect, imperfect adaptation to a changing world. You are a survivor of the squeeze. You are a vessel of deep time, carrying the memories of the forest and the fire, but living in the grace of the dream. The echoes in the bones settle into quiet. The ancient struggle is over. The night wraps around you, soft and forgiving, just as the world has become. Drift now. Drift down the river of sleep. Past the fires of the ancestors, past the green canopy of the beginning, into the velvet silence of your own rest. The jaw is still. The mind is free. The wisdom is yours. Sleep.